Have you ever noticed that the most common, unspoken rule of life is the one we all quietly break? It's the act of listening not to comprehend, but to formulate a response. You've surely experienced it. You're sharing something meaningful, and you can almost see the other person assembling their comeback in their mind. This isn't born of ill will, but from a deeply ingrained habit. It's the way many of us were conditioned to engage in conversation. Answer swiftly, have a prepared argument, make your presence felt. Yet the genuine strength in any exchange isn't found in delivering the next clever line. It lies in offering someone the silence and respect they need to complete their own thought. To listen for the purpose of understanding requires that we release our attachment to being correct or impressive. It involves attuning ourselves not only to the words being spoken, but to the way they are delivered, the rhythm, the underlying strain, the empty spaces between phrases. That is where true communication resides. Consider a straightforward illustration. A colleague mentions, "Work has been utterly draining these past few weeks." An impulse driven by response would be to jump in with, "Tell me about it. I'm in the same boat." The focus immediately shifts back to you. A more magnanimous approach, however, would be to remain with them, to ask, "What exactly has been happening?" This subtle alteration transforms the entire dynamic from one of implicit competition to one of genuine connection. From a psychological standpoint, this manner of listening fosters a sense of security. It disarms people, lowering the defensive walls we all tend to build. When an individual feels genuinely heard, they no longer feel the need to amplify their voice or restate their position. They find ease. They become more open. And they will remember that exchange because you didn't just provide an answer, you offered understanding. I always strive for a win-win outcome. So many of us approach disagreements with the underlying assumption that one person must walk away defeated. We believe that if one side gains an advantage, the other must inherently lose something. However, this premise often overlooks a crucial possibility: the opportunity to create a solution that serves both parties. The concept of a mutually beneficial result is more than just corporate talk. Its foundations are in our psychology and how we interact as human beings. It embodies a philosophy that places a higher value on collaboration than on rivalry, and on lasting resolutions over momentary victories. At its heart, this is about approaching challenges in a way that benefits all participants, rather than viewing every interaction as a battle to be won. Let's consider a classic scenario. Two people sharing an apartment are at odds over who gets the larger bedroom. If one is fixated on winning, the other is left feeling diminished. But what happens if they re-examine the terms of the discussion? Perhaps the one who takes the more spacious room contributes a greater share of the rent, or the other secures a superior area for a personal office or a better closet. The result may not be perfectly symmetrical, but each person departs feeling that their needs were taken into account, and their dignity was upheld. Psychologically, this method resonates with our innate sense of fairness, autonomy, and personal drive. People demonstrate more willingness to cooperate when they feel their perspective is acknowledged, and they act more generously when they are not being backed into a corner. Furthermore, a win-win approach often fosters innovative solutions, ideas that would never surface if the primary objective was simply to gain the upper hand. It also fortifies trust over the long term. When others see that you are aiming for a shared benefit, not just your personal gain, they are far more inclined to reciprocate that gesture. This builds relationships where outcomes naturally improve, not through pressure, but through partnership. Seeking a win-win solution is not always a simple path. It demands energy, adaptability, and the patience to truly grasp another's needs. Yet when it succeeds, it achieves more than just resolving a single issue. It reshapes how others perceive you and how you, in turn, perceive the world. I've learned to compliment the effort, not merely the outcome. When an individual achieves something remarkable, our default is to say, "You have such a gift," or "The result was flawless." But there is a more profound form of acknowledgement, one that centers not just on what they produced, but on the dedication they invested to bring it to life. The psychological principle here, that of complimenting effort over outcome, has its origins in the theory of a growth mindset. Pioneered by the psychologist Carol Dweck, this framework clarifies how our responses to success and failure are shaped by the type of encouragement we are given. When we praise only the final product, people can begin to tether their self-worth to that singular achievement. But when we acknowledge the hard work involved, we cultivate resilience, persistence, and a deeper, more sustainable motivation. To illustrate, if a student achieves an excellent grade and you remark, "You must be incredibly intelligent," the praise is tied to an attribute they cannot change. If, however, you say, "You must have dedicated a great deal of work to this," the emphasis moves to the controllable factors, their method, their time management, and the focus they brought to the task. This distinction is critical because results do not always tell the whole story. A person might invest immense effort and still fall short of victory. Applauding their dedication communicates that their work had value, regardless of the final score. This helps build a form of confidence that rests on personal contribution, not on chance or innate skill. This principle extends well beyond the classroom. Telling a friend, "I can see how much careful consideration you put into this," or a colleague, "I observed how meticulously you navigated that issue," reinforces the behaviors they chose, not just the results they happen to get. Praise centered on effort nurtures emotional resilience because it is anchored in something repeatable. It honors the journey, not just the destination. This helps people remain driven, grow from their missteps, and find pride in their commitment, even as the ultimate outcome remains uncertain. I make it a point to own my portion of the problem first. This practice is drawn from principles of conflict management and behavioral science. In any dispute, accountability is rarely confined to one side. Yet discussions often stall when both parties are focused exclusively on defending their own position. When you initiate by recognizing your own contribution, no matter how minor, you effectively lower the other person's defensiveness and create an opening for genuine progress. From a psychological standpoint, this approach works by triggering a mechanism known as reciprocity. When one individual demonstrates vulnerability or accepts responsibility, the other is far more inclined to follow suit. The entire dynamic shifts from a state of confrontation to one of collaboration. Here is how this appears in practice. Imagine you and a colleague have just had a strained conversation. Instead of starting with, "You failed to understand my point," you could begin by saying, "I recognize that I cut you off, and I'm sure that didn't help the situation." This simple act of taking ownership transforms the atmosphere. It demonstrates emotional maturity, and in doing so, builds trust. The same applies in our personal lives. Admitting to a partner, "I became defensive and I should not have," can soften the terrain for a more truthful dialogue. Even if you believe the other person's contribution to the problem was more significant, acknowledging your role first makes it more probable that they will reflect on their own. Claiming your share of the issue does not equate to accepting all the blame. It is simply about taking the first step and concentrating on what is within your control. It signals that your intention is to understand, not just to be proven right. In a great many instances, that one small concession is the very thing that breaks a stalemate and allows for a resolution. I've learned to mirror feelings first. The solutions can come later. A friend might say, "I'm just so weary of everything at the moment." Before they have even finished their thought, your mind is already generating a list of potential remedies. Getting more rest, taking a walk, perhaps planning a holiday. This response is almost instinctual. However, in that specific moment, what they likely required was something entirely different. To feel that they were understood. The principle of mirroring feelings before offering fixes is straightforward yet profoundly effective. When people are grappling with emotional difficulties, their immediate need is seldom for advice. It is for validation. This means demonstrating that you have heard the emotion they are expressing, not just the words they are using. Mirroring someone's feelings is not about mindlessly repeating what they have said. It involves identifying and reflecting the emotion they are conveying in a calm and clear manner. If someone shares, "I feel like I'm completely stuck," a mirrored response would be, "That sounds incredibly frustrating." There are no suggestions offered yet, only acknowledgement. What this accomplishes is the lowering of emotional barriers. When a person feels genuinely seen and comprehended, they become more receptive to conversation and eventually to considering solutions. If you bypass this step and move directly to, "Here's what you should do," your words can come across as dismissive, no matter how well-intentioned. This approach taps into a fundamental human requirement for emotional validation. We all have a need to know that our feelings are coherent to someone else. Once that is established, the mind begins to settle, making it easier for individuals to process their thoughts and contemplate their next steps. Mirroring feelings is not a complex skill, but it does require conscious awareness. You must listen not just for the facts, but for the tone, the energy, and the underlying emotion. It is the pause that precedes the plan, and that small pause has the power to shift the entire trajectory of a conversation for the better. I try to keep my sense of humor fresh. There is a reason a joke elicits a laugh on the first telling, and a roll of the eyes on the third. Humor thrives on the element of surprise, as repetition is its natural enemy. In the realm of psychology, this is connected to a phenomenon known as habituation, the brain's innate tendency to cease reacting to stimuli it has encountered before. A new joke captures our attention and triggers our reward centers. A familiar one is often filtered out, like indistinct background chatter. This principle is not limited to punchlines. It extends to the tone we use, the timing of our remarks, and even the self-deprecating anecdotes we tend to rely on. When we employ the same lines repeatedly, whether at work, in discussions, or on social platforms, it can feel like a safe and predictable strategy. However, it also runs the risk of becoming a hollow performance that isolates rather than connects. This is because people do not just respond to the joke itself. They respond to novelty, presence, and relevance. Fresh humor isn't about a constant effort to be witty. It is about being observant of what is unfolding in the here and now. What minor absurdity just took place that only we, in this shared moment, witnessed? That is where humor makes its greatest impact, when it is alive and immediate. Think of it as being more akin to improvisational theater than to a polished stand-up routine. You are not delivering a rehearsed piece. You are responding to the room, the energy, and the inherent strangeness of reality. This is why the same friend can make you laugh in a multitude of different ways. They are present with you in the moment, not just replaying their greatest hits. So when your humor starts to feel worn or mechanical, it may be a signal to adjust your perspective. What was effective in the past might no longer be, and that is perfectly fine. Humor evolves as you do. Keeping it current is not just about being entertaining. It is about being authentic, being present, and choosing genuine connection over tired routine. I prioritize being present over being pinged. Imagine you are deep in a conversation when your phone illuminates. You take a quick look, nothing critical, but somehow the essence of the moment has already been altered. This is what psychologists refer to as attention residue. A portion of your focus remains tethered to the last thing you saw or heard, even after you have nominally returned to the conversation. Your brain attempts to juggle both, but it does not do so effectively. Instead, it switches rapidly between tasks, sacrificing depth in both domains. To prioritize presence over pings means to consciously choose to be where you are, not just in body, but in mind. It is about learning to resist the constant pull of minor alerts, vibrations, and background stimuli that draw your attention away from the individuals right in front of you. In our current age, where everything vies for our focus, notifications, news updates, group messages, being completely present has become a rarity, yet its importance has never been greater. Research demonstrates that people feel more respected and deeply connected when someone offers them their undivided attention, without intermittent glances at a screen or distracted nods. Presence is a foundation for trust. It communicates to the other person, "You are important enough for me to set everything else aside." This does not imply a complete disregard for your responsibilities or a vow to never check your phone. It means being deliberate. If you are with another person, silence the notifications. If you're engaged in work, establish dedicated blocks of focused time. If you find yourself alone, allow your mind the freedom to wander without compulsively filling every quiet moment. Presence is more than just a matter of politeness. It is a cognitive decision. It is a choice that deepens connections, enhances memory, and alleviates stress. In a world engineered for distraction, choosing to be fully engaged is a quiet act of rebellion. It asserts, "This moment deserves my complete self, not the fragmented version, not the one who is only half here, but the one who observes, listens, and remains." I make it a practice to pass the praise and hold the fault. When an undertaking goes well, it is natural to want to claim some of the credit. Conversely, when things go awry, the instinct is often to deflect responsibility elsewhere. However, in the context of strong relationships and effective leadership, I've found the rule to be straightforward. Be a conduit for praise and a container for fault. From a psychological perspective, this principle taps into our innate responses to fairness, trust, and emotional security. When a person takes full credit for a group's achievement without acknowledging the contributions of others, it can stir feelings of resentment and exclusion. But when praise is distributed generously, highlighting the efforts of teammates, supporters, or collaborators, it reinforces bonds and elevates motivation. Conversely, when difficulties arise, holding the fault means accepting ownership before looking to assign blame. This reflects what psychologists term an internal locus of control, the conviction that you are accountable for your own actions even amidst challenging circumstances. This isn't about shouldering the blame for every single thing that goes wrong. It is about being answerable for your part, particularly when others are observing how you handle yourself under pressure. For instance, in a professional context, a manager who declares, "The team performed exceptionally. This was their achievement," cultivates strong morale. If a project falls short and that same manager states, "The responsibility for that rests with me. I should have identified it sooner," they build lasting credibility. This equilibrium fosters a culture where individuals feel secure enough to contribute their ideas and to be forthright about their mistakes. This approach is equally effective in friendships, families, and communities. Giving someone credit for their contributions while taking responsibility for your own errors is a model of emotional maturity. It demonstrates that praise is not a limited resource and that accountability is a sign of strength, not weakness. In the field of psychology, these behaviors are known to promote trust and cooperation. People will remember who acknowledged their efforts and who stood firm when things became difficult. And it is these small choices in our daily interactions that ultimately define how we are perceived, not merely as competent, but as someone worthy of being followed. I've come to understand that kindness is about doing, not just offering. Most of us want to be kind. We will say things such as, "Let me know if there's anything I can do," or "I'm always here if you need to talk." In reality, however, these offers seldom translate into tangible action. This is the core of the idea. True kindness is demonstrated through deeds, not just words. From a psychological standpoint, extending an offer of kindness provides a sense of satisfaction to the person making it. It feels as though a duty has been fulfilled. I said something supportive. But for the individual on the receiving end, particularly if they are under stress or facing a struggle, a non-specific offer can feel like yet another item on their to-do list. It places the burden on them to pinpoint a need, determine the appropriate way to ask for help, and risk feeling like an imposition. Kindness gains its true meaning when it bypasses the offer stage and transitions directly into a practical act. If a friend is going through a difficult period, do not just say, "Let me know if you need help." Instead, bring them a prepared meal, send them a curated playlist, offer to water their plants. These small, tangible actions are received with greater ease and have a far more significant impact. Psychologically, this is related to a concept known as social friction, the subtle obstacles that make it more challenging for someone to receive assistance. Vague offers increase this friction by shifting the effort back onto the person who is already feeling depleted. A specific action, on the other hand, completely removes that barrier. This principle also manifests in group dynamics. Stating that someone should reach out to a person in need is not nearly as helpful as actually making the call yourself. While words of support are important, it is the action that provides genuine relief. Kindness that is tangible, visible, and offered without pressure makes people feel authentically cared for. And frequently, it is not the magnitude of the act that matters most. It is the fact that someone noticed and took initiative without waiting for a request. That is when kindness truly makes its mark. I view rest as a strategy, not as a reward. The common approach is to see rest as something to be earned, a privilege granted only after all the work has been completed. Yet from a psychological perspective, rest is not a mere indulgence or a deviation from being productive. Rest is an essential strategy. This concept is grounded in our understanding of how the brain and body manage sustained exertion. When we work without interruption, particularly under high pressure, our capacity for focus, decision-making, and creative thought begins to erode. This occurs because our mental stamina, much like our physical energy, is a finite resource. Cognitive fatigue takes hold when we push ourselves for too long, without a pause, which results in more errors, slower cognitive processing, and ultimately, burnout. In psychological studies, it has been demonstrated that brief periods of rest, especially when taken before reaching the point of exhaustion, can significantly enhance performance. Whether it is a few minutes of stepping away from a screen, a walk between meetings, or an entire day of disconnection, rest provides the brain with the opportunity to reset and regain its focus. This principle is applicable across various fields. Athletes incorporate rest into their training regimens to facilitate recovery and achieve peak performance. Musicians and surgeons employ structured breaks to maintain their precision. Despite this, in many professional environments, rest is still perceived as a sign of idleness or something that requires justification. By reframing rest as an integral part of the process, we change our approach to planning. It means actively scheduling periods of recovery, rather than attempting to fill every available moment with more effort. The objective is not to accomplish less, but to work more intelligently. A mind that is well rested is capable of making superior decisions. It is more creative, better at regulating emotions, and more resilient. Rest also has a crucial role in maintaining long-term motivation. When we treat it as fuel instead of a prize, our efforts become more consistent over time. We do not wait until we are completely depleted to recharge. We build recovery into our routines before we reach empty. In both psychology and performance science, rest is not what occurs after the work is finished. It is what makes the work possible in the first place. It is not the final pause. It is an essential component of the system from the very beginning. I believe in spotting potential and naming it aloud. There are times when a single simple comment can stay with you for years. It's not because the remark was dramatic or loud, but because it captured something authentic. You have a gift for this. There's a real talent here. Words like these have weight. This is the essence of the idea, to identify potential in others and to articulate it clearly. In the field of psychology, this is closely linked to the concepts of positive reinforcement and self-efficacy. People are often unable to perceive their own capabilities with clarity, especially when they are feeling uncertain, just starting a new endeavor, or caught in a cycle of self-criticism. When someone else observes a strength and voices it, that quality is given substance. It makes it tangible. This is not about offering hollow compliments or generic praise. It requires paying close attention and being specific in your feedback. For instance, instead of a simple, "good job," a more impactful statement would be, "You posed a truly insightful question in that meeting. You seem to have a natural ability to get to the heart of an issue." This type of feedback is memorable because it is targeted and credible. The psychological effect of this is considerable. When you articulate someone's potential, you help to shape their internal narrative, the story they tell themselves about what they are capable of achieving. This narrative, in turn, influences the level of risk they are willing to take, how they navigate setbacks, and how far they are prepared to push their own boundaries. This can occur in any setting. A coach who recognizes leadership qualities in a quiet athlete, a teacher who sees creative sparks in a student's work, or a friend who points out a display of emotional intelligence in a conversation. These small acts of recognition do more than just feel good. They serve as a guide for development. And the timing of such feedback is crucial. Often, potential is most apparent when someone is in the process of learning, not after they have achieved mastery. It is at this stage that a well-timed comment can generate lasting momentum. Noticing is one part of the equation, but naming it clearly and audibly gives it real significance. It communicates, "I see this quality in you." And sometimes, that is the very thing that makes all the difference. I make a point to offer the last slice and to mean it. Picture yourself at a dinner table with friends. A single slice of pizza remains. Everyone notices it, yet no one makes a move. That last piece of food transforms into something more. It becomes a quiet test of social dynamics. From a psychological perspective, this situation is interpreted through the lens of reciprocity, social norms, and altruism. We are inherently attuned to acts of fairness, and offering someone the final piece of something desirable is a subtle yet powerful gesture of social generosity. It signals that you are placing the needs of the group above your own, not out of obligation, but out of genuine consideration. But the nuance lies in the execution. When you make the offer, and it is truly sincere, it is received differently. People are often adept at sensing hesitation or a performative display of politeness. That slight awkward pause, the slow reach after you hear, "Are you certain?" It indicates that the offer was not without conditions. True generosity, even in these minor moments, is felt when it is offered without reservation. No guilt, no expectation of praise, just a sincere act of sharing. In behavioral research, this is sometimes described as costly signaling. The principle is that genuine generosity requires giving up something of actual value, not simply offering what you did not particularly want in the first place. And that last slice of pizza serves as a perfect, low-stakes illustration. It is not about the food itself. It is about the message it conveys. These kinds of gestures quietly build a foundation of trust. They teach others about your character when there is no formal accounting. And over time, they contribute to how you are perceived within a group. So when that final slice is left on the plate and you say, "Please, have it," if you are truly genuine, you are doing more than just being polite. You are reinforcing the kind of culture that people want to belong to, a culture defined by unspoken respect, shared consideration, and mutual goodwill. One small act that can leave a lasting positive mark. I've learned to laugh at myself before anyone else has the chance. Imagine tripping over your own feet in a public space. It is an awkward moment. Everyone has seen it. But then, you remark with a smile, and that is precisely why my dance career never took off. Instantly, the dynamic shifts. People are laughing with you, not at you. This is the psychological power behind laughing at yourself first. This concept utilizes what is known as self-deprecating humor, and when applied with care, it can be a highly effective social instrument. In psychological terms, it serves to diminish embarrassment and foster connection. When you acknowledge your own blunders with a touch of levity, you neutralize the potential sting and remove yourself as a target. It is a signal of confidence, not of insecurity. Here is the mechanism at play. When you laugh at yourself, you're communicating to others that you are not easily wounded. That display of self-awareness immediately eases social tension. People no longer feel the need to tread carefully around your mistake or be concerned about your reaction. You have effectively diffused the pressure. This is particularly valuable in situations that feel openly uncomfortable, such as misspeaking during a presentation, spilling a drink in a meeting, or struggling to find an answer. A quick, light-hearted joke or a simple acknowledgement of the moment can create a sense of psychological security for both you and those who are watching. However, there is a fine balance to maintain. The objective is not to belittle yourself or to persistently minimize your strengths. It is to demonstrate that you can be fallible without becoming defensive. The laughter is not about making yourself smaller. It is about taking ownership of the moment before it can define you. Psychologically, this is an act of emotional dexterity. You are transforming potential shame into a moment of shared amusement. In many instances, it is this kind of honest, good-natured response that builds trust, dispels judgment, and turns awkwardness into something relatable. People do not remember perfection. They remember how you handled the stumble. I've come to understand that timing matters more than truth. A piece of information can be entirely accurate, clear, and even beneficial. But if it is delivered at the wrong moment, it can be completely ineffective or even damaging. This is the essence of the idea that timing is often more crucial than the truth itself. In both psychology and our daily lives, what we say can be far less significant than when we say it. This is not a justification for dishonesty or for concealing vital information. It is about developing an awareness of emotional readiness. When an individual is feeling overwhelmed, depleted, or emotionally vulnerable, they are generally not in a state to absorb even the most well-reasoned feedback. In such moments, presenting a harsh truth can feel less like support and more like an assault. Consider this scenario. Immediately after someone has received difficult news, you might feel compelled to offer a broader perspective, such as, "Everything happens for a reason," or "This will make you stronger." While these statements may be offered with sincerity, when delivered prematurely, they often come across as dismissive. The person is not yet prepared to take a step back. They are still in the midst of the experience. From a psychological standpoint, this is related to emotional regulation. Our brains require time to regain composure before we can process complex or abstract concepts. If you provide insights while someone is still in a state of emotional overload, they are unlikely to absorb the message. They will simply react to it. The same principle holds true in situations of conflict. Offering a candid critique in the heat of an argument might be factually correct, but it will not be productive. Waiting until both parties have calmed down significantly increases the likelihood that the message will be genuinely heard and considered. Knowing the right moment to speak is a skill, and a potent one at that. It involves assessing the emotional climate of a situation, recognizing when someone is still in the process of feeling, and choosing to wait rather than to rush. Because even the most well-intentioned truth requires the right conditions to find fertile ground. I give my presence, not just presence. Imagine someone arrives with a beautifully wrapped package, but as they present it, their attention is elsewhere. A quick glance at their phone, a mind not fully engaged in the conversation. The gift itself may be appreciated, but the very thing that forges a real connection is absent, their complete attention. The principle of giving presence, not just presence, is based on the recognition that our attention is one of the most meaningful forms of care we can offer. Psychologically, it serves as a powerful signal of validation. When someone puts away their devices, maintains eye contact, and responds with genuine thought, they are communicating. You are what matters right now. It is easy to fall into the belief that tangible gifts are the primary expression of appreciation. And while they certainly can be meaningful, research has consistently shown that emotional attunement has a far more profound effect on the quality and satisfaction of our relationships. Presence communicates a sense of safety. It builds trust and allows people to feel genuinely seen. In our daily lives, this might manifest as silencing notifications during a shared meal, refraining from multitasking while someone is sharing something of importance, or simply remaining fully engaged in a conversation instead of mentally preparing your next response. These small, often unseen actions create a kind of emotional warmth that is difficult to replicate with material possessions. Giving our presence also has psychological benefits for the giver. When you are fully engaged, your own stress levels tend to decrease. Your capacity for empathy is strengthened, and your sense of connection deepens. Giving your attention is not just an act of kindness, it is a regulating one. This is why moments of true presence often resonate with us far longer than any physical gift. A memory of someone listening without judgment, a quiet afternoon where time felt unhurried. These experiences are not just felt, they are stored. And long after the present is forgotten, the memory of your presence will remain. I've found that compliments land best when they are spontaneous. A compliment that takes you by surprise often stays with you for a much longer time. It feels authentic, sincere, and perhaps even a little unexpected. This is the power of spontaneity. The idea that compliments are most effective when they are spontaneous is rooted in how we process sincerity. In psychology, we have a natural tendency to trust feedback that feels unscripted. When a compliment seems calculated, overly polished, or strategically timed to make an impression, it can be perceived as a maneuver rather than a genuine expression. Spontaneous compliments, in contrast, feel like authentic thoughts that have simply found their way to the surface. You might observe someone resolving an issue with remarkable speed and say, "That was some quick, smart thinking." Or, in the middle of a conversation, you might pause and remark, "You have a way of explaining things with such clarity." These moments feel genuine because they were clearly not premeditated to gain favor. They just emerged. This taps into what is known as perceived authenticity. When a compliment does not appear to be aimed at achieving a specific goal, such as approval, attention, or influence, it becomes easier to accept as true. The brain responds favorably to praise, but it responds even more favorably when it senses that the praise was not manufactured. This principle also extends to timing. Compliments that are delivered immediately after you notice something feel more connected to the moment. Waiting too long or offering praise in a formulaic or routine manner can diminish its impact. It can feel more like an obligation than a reflection of what someone actually observed or valued. Spontaneity does not imply carelessness. It implies presence. The most effective compliments often arise from genuinely paying attention, not from a mental note to say something nice. And when people feel that you have noticed them in real time, not just as a matter of politeness, they are far more likely to remember it, believe it, and feel genuinely valued as a result. I check in twice. The second question is what matters. In psychology, there is a phenomenon known as emotional masking, where individuals conceal their true feelings to maintain an appearance of composure, strength, or simply to sidestep uncomfortable discussions. "I'm fine" is often a conditioned reflex, a swift way to signal either, "I don't wish to discuss this now," or I lack the words to explain it. The first time you inquire, "How are you?" most people will provide this automatic response. However, when you follow up a second time, calmly, kindly, and without applying pressure, it conveys an entirely different message. It communicates, "I am genuinely interested in the answer." That simple act of asking again can be the very thing that allows someone to move from silence to openness. This does not mean you should press for intimate details or demand vulnerability. It is about granting permission for someone to share more if they choose to do so. For example, after an initial brush-off, a follow-up like, "Are you certain you're all right?" Or even, "If there's more on your mind, I'm here to listen," lets them know the door is still open. This approach is effective because it fosters psychological safety. The first inquiry tests the waters. The second demonstrates consistency. It affirms that your concern was more than just polite formality. In both our personal and professional lives, people tend to remember who took the time to circle back. That second check-in communicates that they are not invisible. And for someone who is struggling, the knowledge that they are being seen, even just a little more closely, can make it easier to take the next step toward honesty, support, or simply feeling less isolated. I assume error, never malice. Imagine a driver abruptly cuts you off in traffic. Your initial reaction is likely to be anger, perhaps even the thought, "They did that deliberately." Yet in most cases, that is not true. They simply failed to see you. This principle, to assume error rather than malice, is a simple yet profound shift in mindset. In the realm of psychology, this is related to what is known as the fundamental attribution error, our inclination to attribute others' actions to their character flaws rather than to their circumstances. When a colleague is late for a meeting, we might assume they are irresponsible. If they overlook a message, we might think they are intentionally ignoring us. But more often than not, the reason is something ordinary. Traffic, stress, a moment of forgetfulness, not a personal attack, just a human oversight. To assume error does not mean to be naive or to disregard patterns of poor behavior. It simply means that our initial explanation for someone's actions should allow for the possibility of imperfection, not immediately default to ill intent. This mental adjustment helps to reduce unnecessary conflict. It tempers our reactive judgments and can prevent minor misunderstandings from escalating into major disputes. In practice, it involves pausing before reacting, giving someone the benefit of the doubt, and telling yourself, perhaps they were unaware, instead of, they knew exactly what they were doing. It is a habit that demands a degree of self-control, but it strengthens the resilience of our relationships, whether with coworkers, family members, or even strangers. This principle fosters a sense of curiosity rather than immediate confrontation. Human beings are constantly making mistakes. That is not a cynical view. It is a statement of reality. But if we treat every misstep as a deliberate offense, we risk burning bridges before we have even understood the situation. Assuming error first does not excuse all behavior, but it grants us the space to see things more clearly and frequently, to respond with greater grace. Let one car in, and civilization survives another day. You find yourself in a slow crawl of bumper-to-bumper traffic, running late, with tension steadily mounting. Then you see a driver signaling to merge into your lane. You face a moment of hesitation. Do you allow them in, or do you close the gap? It is a fleeting decision, but in psychological terms, a choice like this carries a surprising amount of significance. Let one car in, and civilization survives another day, is a light-hearted way of expressing a serious truth. Minor acts of cooperation are what preserve social cohesion. This idea is connected to what psychologists refer to as pro-social behavior. Actions taken to benefit others, often without any immediate personal gain. When you permit another car to merge, you're not earning money or enhancing your status, but you're reinforcing a culture of mutual trust. In congested cities or during stressful commutes, that trust can be easily diminished and is difficult to restore. From a psychological standpoint, allowing someone to merge activates empathy-driven decision-making. It signals that you acknowledge another person's presence and needs, even if it causes a slight inconvenience to you. This type of action taps into what social scientists call reciprocity norms, the unspoken expectation that acts of kindness will, in time, be returned, even if not directly. Interestingly, studies have shown that either witnessing or performing these small pro-social acts can actually reduce stress levels. It provides the brain with a sense of agency and meaning. And when people observe others behaving courteously, such as yielding a lane, they are more inclined to do the same, creating a self-perpetuating cycle. This principle extends far beyond the confines of traffic. Holding a door open, allowing someone to speak, giving space on a crowded sidewalk. These are not just displays of good manners. They are micro-investments in our shared dignity. Each one gently nudges our environment a little closer to a state of civility. So, while letting one car in might appear to be a trivial act, psychology views it as part of a larger picture. A quiet reminder that the way we behave in small moments shapes the kind of world we are collectively building, one merge at a time. I found that voice notes are superior to texts for complex tone. A simple word like sure in a text message can carry a dozen different meanings: genuine excitement, biting sarcasm, underlying resentment, or complete indifference. The word itself remains unchanged, but the tone behind it alters everything. This is where the value of a voice note becomes clear. When a message is emotionally nuanced or heavily dependent on context, tone is not just a detail, it is essential. And text, for all its convenience, strips away most of that subtlety. Psychologists refer to this as paralinguistic communication, the pitch, pace, volume, and rhythm of speech that infuse our words with deeper meaning. These subtle vocal indicators are completely lost when we distill complex emotions into flat characters on a screen. This is precisely why a message intended to be lighthearted can be perceived as cold, or one meant to be reassuring can feel dismissive. Voice notes have the power to restore that missing dimension. They allow warmth, softness, or seriousness to be clearly conveyed. The slight sigh before a sentence, the pause after a difficult word, all of these elements shape how the message is received, especially in moments of tension, vulnerability, or ambiguity. Hearing a person's actual voice can prevent misunderstandings before they have a chance to escalate. It communicates effort, care, and presence. It says, "This moment is important enough for me to speak it aloud." Of course, not every communication requires this level of nuance, but when the content is intricate, when emotions are tangled, or when the timing is sensitive, the human voice can achieve what text cannot. It creates a genuine connection, even across a distance. In our digital age, clarity is not just about selecting the right words, it is about delivering the right feeling. And when the stakes are high or the meaning is layered, your voice is often the more reliable instrument. It carries not only information, but also intention. And from a psychological perspective, that is what makes all the difference. I decline in the same way I would want to be declined. No one enjoys being told no, but the manner in which it is communicated can make a world of difference. This is the core of the principle. Decline as you would wish to be declined. In the field of psychology, this is a concept deeply rooted in empathy and social reciprocity, the practice of treating others as you would want to be treated if your roles were reversed. A refusal does not need to be sharp, dismissive, or uncomfortable. In fact, a thoughtfully delivered no can actually fortify trust, as it demonstrates honesty combined with genuine care. It is not just about the word no. It is about the entire delivery. When someone asks for your assistance, your time, or your participation, and you are unable to agree, the way you respond is crucial. A vague or curt "I can't" can feel like a rejection of the person, not just of their request. However, a response such as, "I truly appreciate you considering me for this. At this time, I am unable to commit, but I would be very interested in being involved on another occasion," conveys the same message with both clarity and respect. This approach is applicable across various contexts: professional settings, friendships, and social invitations. Declining with warmth and specificity shows that you are not trying to avoid the person, but rather the specific task or timing. From a psychological standpoint, this helps to maintain relational trust, the sense that even when you establish boundaries, the underlying connection remains valued. And it operates in reverse as well. When you decline with kindness, you are modeling how you would want someone to respond to your own requests. This establishes a tone of mutual understanding for future interactions. From a behavioral viewpoint, practicing considerate refusals can also help to mitigate patterns of people-pleasing. It proves that setting boundaries does not have to be a cold or guilt-ridden process. It can be both clear and compassionate. Ultimately, Saying no is an unavoidable part of life, but when it is done with empathy and respect, it becomes more than a simple refusal. It becomes a message of mutual dignity, and that is something people will remember long after they have forgotten the no itself. I step aside without needing to be asked. You do not require a sign to recognize when you are blocking someone's path. Whether you are at a subway exit, a store entrance, or simply on a crowded sidewalk, learning to move aside without a prompt is one of the most fundamental forms of social intelligence. This behavior reflects what is known in psychology as pro-social behavior, actions taken with the intention of benefiting others, even in small, everyday ways. It is not about making grand gestures. It is about acknowledging our shared space and adjusting your position so that others can navigate more easily. It might seem like a minor detail, but the mental skill underlying this action is called situational awareness. Situational awareness involves being conscious of what is happening around you, who is attempting to pass, who appears to be in a hurry, or how much space you are occupying. When you move without being prompted, you are not just being polite, you are lessening the mental burden on others. They do not have to speak up, maneuver around you, or feel a sense of discomfort. You have preemptively resolved the issue they were quietly confronting. This small act also triggers something known as reciprocal altruism. Individuals who witness or are the beneficiaries of these subtle kindnesses are more inclined to extend similar courtesies to others. A single step aside can initiate a chain reaction of social cooperation. This is not about being overly self-conscious. It is about being attuned to your environment and recognizing that everyone is trying to get somewhere. Social harmony often depends on these unspoken low-effort choices. Stepping aside is not a dramatic act. It does not earn applause, but it does create a sense of ease, preserve the natural flow of movement, and demonstrate your awareness of others, something that makes our shared public spaces feel just a bit more civilized. I try to learn the lesson before I label the day as bad. Some days simply seem to go against you. You spill your coffee, you miss a deadline, you have a disagreement with someone you care about, and by midday, you have already concluded that it is a bad day. However, psychology offers a more constructive approach. Learn the lesson before you label the day. This concept is connected to how our brains process and categorize experiences. When something negative occurs, we have a tendency to make a broad, sweeping judgment. This is known as cognitive filtering, focusing on what has gone wrong and allowing that to define the entire day. This pattern can lead to unnecessary stress, a pessimistic outlook, and even eventual burnout. The alternative is a practice called cognitive reappraisal, taking a step back, observing the situation, and asking what it might be trying to teach you. Instead of declaring, "This day is completely ruined," you might reframe it as, "That conversation did not go as planned. Perhaps I need to reconsider the way I approached it." The focus shifts from applying a label to the day to extracting valuable insight from the experience. Here is how this works in practice. You deliver a subpar presentation at work. Rather than allowing it to negatively affect your mood for the rest of the day, you take a moment to pause and ask what could be improved for next time. Would more thorough preparation, a slower pace, or a clearer message have made a difference? This subtle shift from judgment to learning can change the entire trajectory of your day. From a psychological standpoint, this technique helps to reduce rumination, the repetitive loop of negative thoughts that can amplify stress. It also builds resilience, which is your capacity to recover from setbacks by reframing how you perceive them. A day that includes a setback is not automatically a bad day. It is a day that has provided feedback. By learning from what went wrong before you label the entire experience, you cultivate a more balanced perspective on both yourself and your circumstances. It is a small habit, but one that makes maintaining emotional equilibrium a little more achievable, especially when everything feels off course. I share my clouds as often as my sunshine. When something positive happens, it is effortless to share. A promotion at work, an amusing anecdote, a photograph from a vacation, it all comes out naturally. But when life feels heavy or uncertain, most of us tend to hold back. We keep it to ourselves, not wanting to burden others with our troubles. This is where the value of this idea comes into play. Share your clouds as often as your sunshine. In the realm of psychology, this is related to emotional openness and authentic self-disclosure, the capacity to share the full spectrum of your feelings, not just the positive ones. Many people filter what they reveal, believing that only good news is welcome in conversation. But this pattern creates emotional divides. It can leave individuals feeling isolated, even when they are in the company of others. When someone is only exposed to the highlight reel of your life, it establishes an unspoken pressure for them to present their own life in the same way. This ultimately restricts genuine connection. In contrast, when people are willing to share their difficulties, stress at work, moments of self-doubt, or simply a challenging day, it creates an environment where more honest relationships can flourish. This does not mean you should overshare or transform every conversation into a therapy session. It simply means giving yourself permission to say, to be honest, today has been quite tough, and trusting that it is acceptable to be heard without an immediate need for a solution. This kind of simple honesty makes it easier for others to do the same. Psychologically, this also serves as a model for emotional safety. It demonstrates that all feelings, both positive and negative, are considered valid within a shared space. Over time, this helps to diminish the stigma associated with expressing vulnerability and builds a deeper level of trust within our personal and social circles. Real support is a two-way street. If we only share our joys, we limit the extent to which we can feel supported when times are hard. Sharing the clouds does not diminish the sunshine. It simply makes the complete picture more authentic. And that is where true connection begins to take root. I coach in private and praise in public. No one appreciates being corrected in front of a group, even if the feedback is intended to be helpful. On the other hand, almost everyone values being acknowledged when others are present to witness it. This is the psychological principle behind the practice of coaching in private and praising in public. This idea is founded on two fundamental emotional needs: the need for dignity and the need for recognition. In psychological terms, criticism, regardless of how constructively it is delivered, can activate a threat response when it occurs in a public setting. It feels exposing and at times humiliating because it touches upon our concerns about social standing and our sense of belonging. When you offer coaching or corrective feedback to someone, doing so in a private setting protects these emotional needs. It establishes a space where the individual can reflect, ask questions, and make improvements without the added pressure of feeling judged by a wider audience. Whether it is a manager providing feedback to an employee, a teacher offering guidance to a student, or a friend pointing out a recurring pattern, privacy fosters an environment of honesty without embarrassment. Conversely, public praise has the effect of boosting morale. It reinforces desired behaviors and communicates to others what is being valued, all while providing the individual with a moment of visible appreciation. This type of recognition serves to strengthen trust, increase motivation, and enhance what psychologists refer to as social reinforcement, the phenomenon where others notice and respond to positive behavior. Here's a straightforward example. A team member expertly handles a challenging client situation. You could thank them quietly, or you could mention their excellent work during the next team meeting. That public acknowledgement not only bolsters their confidence, but also sets a positive example for others. When used in tandem, these two practices, private coaching and public praise, create a healthy balance of accountability and encouragement. They protect an individual's self-respect while simultaneously reinforcing their progress. And in any environment where people are learning, performing, or growing, that balance can transform average relationships into ones built on high trust and high function. I'm careful not to tease someone who is already shrinking. Some jokes land well, while others can feel like a quiet but sharp slap. Teasing may appear to be a harmless part of how people connect. But when an individual is already feeling small, self-conscious, or uncertain, that same joke can resonate with a much greater intensity. Instead of fostering connection, it creates distance. The principle of not teasing someone who is already shrinking highlights a fundamental truth of social dynamics. Context is more important than content. A comment that might be humorous in one situation can be deeply hurtful in another, particularly when it touches upon the very thing someone is attempting to conceal or recover from. From a psychological perspective, individuals who are feeling insecure or exposed are already in a defensive mental state. Their stress response is subtly heightened, and their internal monologue is often running a critical commentary. A well-intentioned tease about their mistake, their hesitation, or their silence does not challenge that inner voice. It amplifies it. You will often observe this in group settings. Someone might stumble while telling a story, and instead of receiving support, they are met with a joke at their own expense. Laughter may ensue, but you will see their shoulders tense. They retract a little more. The group may not always perceive this, but the individual certainly does. What makes teasing feel safe is a sense of reciprocity and emotional equilibrium. When someone feels grounded and included, they can laugh at themselves because it does not feel like a threat. But when a person is already withdrawing, socially, emotionally, or physically, a joke directed at them is not banter. It is pressure. Psychological safety hinges on knowing when to engage and when to ease back. And recognizing when someone is already pulling away is a sign of empathy, not oversensitivity. Because the objective is not to toughen them up. It is to create a space where they do not have to be tough at all. If it is not yours, do not take it. If it is private, do not share it. You might come across a phone left unattended on a table, or you might be entrusted with a private story shared in a moment of confidence. In both situations, you are presented with a choice. Psychology teaches us that these are not merely moral dilemmas. They are reflections of our understanding of boundaries, identity, and respect. The principle itself is straightforward. If it is not your property, do not take it. If it is confidential, do not disclose it. But the psychological underpinnings are profound. At its core is the concept of psychological ownership, the mental and emotional framework we use to distinguish what belongs to us from what does not. This encompasses not only physical objects, but also ideas, stories, emotions, and even personal reputations. When someone shares something of a personal nature, they are making themselves vulnerable. That act is what builds psychological trust, which is the foundation of our closest relationships. To violate that trust by sharing something without consent can evoke deep feelings of betrayal. This is not just about spreading gossip. It is about infringing upon someone's sense of control over their own identity. The same logic holds true for tangible possessions. Taking something that does not belong to you, even if it seems insignificant, can damage another person's sense of psychological security. The feeling that their space, belongings, or personal boundaries are respected and safe. Research indicates that these types of violations, whether they are emotional or material, can lead to lasting fractures in both our professional and personal relationships. There is also the matter of our own self-concept. When we act with integrity in moments when we are not being observed, choosing not to take what is not ours or to protect what is not ours to share, we are reinforcing our own internal values. Over time, these private choices forge a more resilient and consistent sense of self. Respect, I've found, is not primarily demonstrated in grand, public displays. It reveals itself in the small, everyday decisions we make, especially when there is no one present to hold us accountable. When you have caused someone pain, whether through a misstep, a careless word, or an unintended action, the immediate instinct can be to explain, to delve into the details, to clarify your intentions. But I have learned that the more protracted the apology, the more difficult it is for the other person to truly receive it. The principle is to apologize without a lengthy monologue. It is about keeping the focus squarely on accountability, not on justification. In psychological terms, apologies are most effective when they validate the other person's experience and acknowledge the harm that was done. The moment you start introducing reasons, backstory, or disclaimers, the apology begins to sound like a defense. A simple, "I am sorry that I hurt you. That was not acceptable," carries far more weight than, "I apologize, but I was exhausted, you caught me at a difficult moment, and I didn't intend for it to sound that way." The second version feels less like an apology and more like a rationalization, subtly shifting the spotlight away from the person who was hurt. This is not to say that context is unimportant, it just does not belong in the initial move. Leading with a clean, direct apology communicates that you are not trying to soften the impact or dodge responsibility. This applies to everyday situations as well. If you are late for a meeting, saying, "My apologies for keeping you waiting," is clearer and more respectful than launching into a narrative about traffic or your morning routine. It shows you are attuned to the effect, not just the cause. Psychologically, short and sincere apologies are easier to trust. They allow space for the other person to respond, rather than making them sit through your reasoning. And most of the time, people are not asking for a full explanation. They just want to know that you understand and that you care enough to own it. That is what truly makes the difference. I try to engage only in positive-sum games. Some interactions inherently feel like a confrontation, where one person's victory necessitates the other's loss. But not every situation must be a zero-sum contest. The concept of a positive-sum game completely reorients that perspective. In essence, it describes any scenario where multiple participants can gain, where value is not merely redistributed, but genuinely expanded. And in the course of our lives, these opportunities arise more frequently than we might imagine. Consider two colleagues collaborating on a significant project. If they vie for individual recognition, it becomes a zero-sum game. One advances while the other is left behind. But if they offer genuine support to each other, merge their unique strengths, and collectively elevate the project's quality, that is a positive-sum outcome. The team succeeds. They both distinguish themselves. The client is more satisfied. No one had to be defeated for another to triumph. This is not just a principle for the workplace. It is applicable to friendships, negotiations, and entire communities. A positive-sum approach means shifting your focus from "what can I acquire?" to "what can we cultivate?" That change fundamentally alters how we tackle problems, how we listen, and how we invest in the success of others. It conditions us to seek out alignment rather than leverage. Psychologically, people flourish in settings where mutual benefit is the goal. Trust deepens, creativity is unleashed, and cooperation ceases to be about mere politeness. It becomes the most logical course of action. People begin to see that constructing something together is far more rewarding than winning something alone. This is not always feasible. There are moments that demand firm boundaries or the pursuit of a personal win. But whenever possible, and particularly when it is not the obvious path, choosing the positive-sum approach often yields more than anticipated for everyone involved. Let people arrive at their own speed. Some individuals warm up to a situation immediately. Others require a little more time to feel secure, to feel seen, or to feel prepared to engage. When we impose an expectation that everyone should move at the same tempo, we risk misinterpreting hesitation as a lack of interest, or quietness as a form of avoidance. The idea of letting people arrive at their own speed is grounded in an appreciation for individual processing styles and the need for emotional safety. In psychology, this can be linked to variations in attachment patterns, levels of social anxiety, or the fundamental differences between introversion and extroversion. Some people naturally acclimate to new environments slowly, not because of indifference, but because they are in the process of calibrating. It is easy to miss this in a fast-moving world. In group discussions, the most assertive voice often commands the most attention. In conversations, the swiftest reply is often seen as the most engaged. But emotional presence does not always operate on a stopwatch. Sometimes it manifests as silence before trust, or observation before participation. A common error is to try to accelerate connection on a predetermined schedule, urging someone to just open up, or nudging them to be more involved, but this rarely expedites the process. In fact, it often causes people to retreat further. What proves more effective is patience combined with presence, creating space, remaining available, and showing you are there without demanding they match your energy. You might witness this in a new colleague who remains on the periphery of conversations for weeks, only to then contribute a brilliant idea, or a friend who listens intently for months before sharing something deeply personal. Their pace is not a deficiency. It is a part of how they establish security. Psychological safety is not built on pressure. It is built on space. And when people feel the freedom to arrive at their own speed, they tend to show up more completely when they are finally ready. I say goodbye as if it might be remembered. You're walking out the door, keys in hand, and someone calls out a farewell. You offer a response, barely turning your head. It seems like a minor detail, but that fleeting moment can linger in memory longer than you might expect. Psychologists refer to this as the recency effect, the principle that people tend to recall the final part of an experience with greater vividness than the middle. In our social interactions, this means that your parting words often carry more emotional significance than you realize. Whether you are concluding a phone call, leaving a social gathering, or saying goodbye before a journey, that last moment leaves a distinct impression. This concept also intersects with closure theory. Goodbyes signify the termination of a connection, at least for that particular moment, and our minds have a natural inclination to seek resolution. If a goodbye feels cold or thoughtless, it can leave someone feeling unsettled, even if the rest of the interaction was warm and positive. And this is not just about grand farewells. A brief but deliberate take care, or I'm genuinely glad we had this talk can feel authentic and complete. It does not need to be overly dramatic, just considerate. A well-executed goodbye honors the conversation that preceded it. It communicates, this exchange had value. In the field of workplace psychology, exit interactions are studied with great care. Leaders who express gratitude for people's efforts, even as they are departing a company, are remembered far more positively. And those partings often establish the tone for long-term professional relationships. The essential point is this: whether it is a 5-minute chat or a long visit, the final words you select have weight. They help to define how the entire encounter is remembered. A touch of warmth at the conclusion can elevate everything that came before it. So when it is time to depart, do not just make an exit. Land the goodbye. Make it intentional. Because sometimes, the last thing you say becomes the thing they remember the longest. I treat my future self as a friend I care about. It is easy to leave the dishes in the sink or to forego an early bedtime with the thought, I will handle it tomorrow. But in psychology, there is a more intelligent approach. Treat your future self as a friend for whom you have genuine concern. This concept is rooted in what is known as future self-continuity, the degree of connection we feel to the person we will become in the days, months, or years ahead. When this connection is strong, we tend to make better decisions. We invest more in our health, our goals, and our responsibilities, not out of a sense of guilt, but out of thoughtful consideration. Imagine that a close friend was going to inherit your current circumstances tomorrow. Your to-do list, your cluttered space, your commitments. You would likely make an effort to make things a little easier for them. That is the principle at play here. Act with that same level of care toward your future self. Psychologically, individuals who perceive their future self as a separate entity are more prone to procrastination and to making short-term choices that result in long-term stress. But when you view that future version of yourself as real and deserving of your help, your behavior naturally shifts. You take an extra 5 minutes to prepare for the morning. You make time to stretch, hydrate, and rest. Not because it is an urgent necessity now, but because you know someone, you, will appreciate it later. This mindset can also help to minimize regret. It bridges the gap between immediate impulse and long-term intention. It reminds us that our well-being is not forged in dramatic, sweeping gestures. It is built through small, consistent acts of kindness toward the person we will be tomorrow. By treating your future self as a friend rather than a stranger you leave problems for, you begin to create systems that are sustainable. That shift in perspective, though simple, rewires how we think about effort, time, and self-care. It transforms every choice into an opportunity to take better care of the person who will benefit most, the next version of you. I celebrate the micro wins because they fuel the macro ones, finishing the opening paragraph of a lengthy report, saying no when your usual response is yes, simply getting out of bed on a particularly difficult day. These may seem like small victories, but from a psychological standpoint, they are anything but insignificant. In the world of psychology, momentum is a powerful force. The concept behind celebrating micro-wins is that acknowledging progress, even in its most minute form, can have a profound impact on our motivation, confidence, and emotional resilience. This is known as the progress principle. Studies have shown that people feel most motivated when they perceive a sense of forward motion, not necessarily upon reaching the final destination. It is not the ultimate goal that drives our daily efforts. It is the tangible evidence that we are inching closer to it. When we take a moment to acknowledge these small steps, writing a single sentence, completing a brief workout, or even just hitting send on a challenging email, we are training our brains to link effort with accomplishment. This process releases dopamine, a neurotransmitter that not only enhances our mood, but also reinforces the behavior itself. Over time, it becomes easier to maintain our efforts because our minds have forged a connection between progress and reward. Conversely, neglecting these micro-wins has the opposite effect. When we reserve our sense of pride only for major milestones, we create long stretches of invisible labor. It becomes easy to feel as though we are making no headway, even when we are quietly constructing something meaningful. This is why some of the most effective systems, from fitness applications to project management tools, are designed around the celebration of small achievements. It keeps people engaged, especially during those moments when the end still feels distant. Progress is not just about the final outcome. It is about consistent reinforcement. By giving our attention to these micro wins, We create a feedback loop that provides the energy needed for the long haul. It is a strategy that transforms sheer willpower into sustainability and sustained effort into eventual success. I am careful not to finish someone's sentence if it costs them courage. When an individual is struggling to articulate something difficult, it is tempting to jump in and help them complete their thought. Your intentions may be good. You might think you know where they are heading. But sometimes, that interruption does more than just accelerate the conversation. It takes away something significant. The principle of not finishing a sentence if it requires courage from the speaker is rooted in an understanding of emotional pacing. In psychology, discussing challenging topics such as grief, regret, or self-doubt necessitates a degree of vulnerability. And vulnerability often moves at a slow pace. People may pause, stumble, or start over, not because they are unsure of what to say, but because they are weighing the risk of saying it. When you complete their sentence, especially during a moment of emotional effort, it can feel as though you have seized control of their narrative. The focus shifts from their voice to your interpretation. Even if your words are accurate, your timing might be wrong, and that can effectively close the door they were just beginning to open. For example, someone might begin with, "I've been thinking that maybe I," and then hesitate. If you interject with, "Want to quit your job?" Even as a well-meaning guess, it could derail a more personal and difficult admission they were working toward, such as, "Don't feel like myself anymore?" That second version is harder to articulate and far more meaningful. This concept is closely tied to psychological safety. It is the sense that you can speak without being rushed, judged, or redirected. Holding space for someone to find their own words, even if it takes a moment, demonstrates respect for both their process and their agency. Listening is not just about hearing the words someone says. It's about providing them with the space to say it in their own way, especially when it is something that takes courage to speak aloud. I text when I am late, even by just 5 minutes. You are running a few minutes behind schedule. Unexpected traffic, a last-minute email, a misplaced set of keys. These things happen. But in that moment, it is the smallest of gestures that can make the most significant difference. Sending a quick text message. From a psychological standpoint, this action taps into a concept known as micro-signaling, small behaviors that effectively communicate respect, reliability, and emotional awareness. When you are late and you fail to communicate, the other person is left in a state of uncertainty. Are they still on their way? Did they forget? Is this engagement important to them? That uncertainty can trigger a stress response in the person who is waiting. Research has shown that ambiguity often causes more discomfort than receiving negative news. A simple message, "Running about 5 minutes behind, my apologies," cuts through that uncertainty. It demonstrates that you are conscious of the other person's time and that you care enough not to leave them in suspense. There's also a social contract at play here. In modern social psychology, punctuality is not merely about arriving on time. It is about demonstrating trustworthiness. When you communicate delays, even minor ones, you are reinforcing the idea that your word carries weight and that you respect your shared plans. This is particularly potent in low-stakes situations, such as meeting a friend for coffee, joining a group call, or meeting someone for a walk. In these moments, a small check-in fosters emotional safety. It conveys the message, "Your time is valuable, even when my schedule is not perfect." The act itself is minuscule. It takes only seconds to send. But its effect can linger. It softens the inconvenience of the wait. It keeps the connection warm. It reminds both parties that even when plans are disrupted, the relationship remains stable. Because in the end, a quick text does not just provide information, it provides affirmation. And that is often what people remember. I've learned that too many yeses become a form of self-betrayal. You agree to assist with one more task. You add another meeting to a schedule that is already overextended. You say yes once more, even as every part of you is silently screaming, "Not this time." It can feel like an act of generosity in the moment, but over time, it transforms into something else entirely. The idea that one yes too many ultimately becomes a betrayal of oneself is rooted in the psychology of boundaries and emotional well-being. Saying yes can often feel like the correct course of action. It is polite, helpful, and supportive. But when it is repeated without any limits, particularly at the expense of your own time, energy, or personal needs, it shifts from a gesture of generosity to one of self-neglect. In psychology, this is often linked to people-pleasing behavior, a pattern where individuals prioritize the needs of others over their own in order to avoid conflict, disappointment, or rejection. While this may seem kind on the surface, it invariably leads to burnout, resentment, and a disconnection from your own priorities. Self-betrayal does not occur through a single major decision. It happens through a series of small, repeated compromises. You sacrifice your rest, you postpone your own goals, and you disregard your personal needs. Not because someone has demanded too much, but because you did not stop saying yes. This does not mean you should cease being helpful or flexible. It means you must become intentional. Every yes should have the space to be a genuine choice, not an automatic obligation. When your calendar, your energy, or your core values are telling you no, honoring that limit is what protects your sense of integrity. Psychologically, establishing boundaries is not a selfish act. It is an act of self-respect. It teaches others how you expect to be treated. But more importantly, it teaches you that your own time and limits are valuable. And when you cultivate that habit, your yes becomes far more meaningful because it is no longer given automatically. It is given deliberately. And that is when generosity becomes sustainable, not just expected. Humor that lands on you first will never hurt others. Imagine you trip over your own feet in a public space. It is an awkward moment, everyone has seen it. But then, you remark with a smile, and that is precisely why my dance career never took off. Instantly, the dynamic shifts. People are laughing with you, not at you. This is the psychological power behind laughing at yourself before anyone else has the chance. This concept utilizes what is known as self-deprecating humor, and when applied with care, it can be a highly effective social instrument. In psychological terms, it serves to diminish embarrassment and foster connection. When you acknowledge your own blunders with a touch of levity, you neutralize the potential sting and remove yourself as a target. It is a signal of confidence, not of insecurity. Here is the mechanism at play. When you laugh at yourself, you are communicating to others that you are not easily wounded. That display of self-awareness immediately eases social tension. People no longer feel the need to tread carefully around your mistake or be concerned about your reaction. You have effectively diffused the pressure. This is particularly valuable in situations that feel openly uncomfortable, such as misspeaking during a presentation, spilling a drink in a meeting, or struggling to find an answer. A quick, lighthearted joke or a simple acknowledgement of the moment can create a sense of psychological security for both you and those who are watching. However, there is a fine balance to maintain. The objective is not to belittle yourself or to persistently minimize your strengths. It is to demonstrate that you can be fallible without becoming defensive. The laughter is not about making yourself smaller. It is about taking ownership of the moment before it can define you. Psychologically, this is an act of emotional dexterity. You are transforming potential shame into a moment of shared amusement. In many instances, it is this kind of honest, good-natured response that builds trust, dispels judgment, and turns awkwardness into something relatable. People do not remember perfection. They remember how you handled the stumble. I keep my bag off the seat because someone else could use it. You board a crowded train or enter a busy waiting area and you notice it. A perfectly usable seat occupied by a bag. No one is sitting there. Just a backpack taking up more space than it requires. It is a small action, but it communicates something much larger. The psychology behind keeping your bag off a seat that someone else might need is about spatial awareness and social signaling. In our shared public spaces, we are constantly interpreting each other's behavior to understand what is acceptable, what is welcome, and what is off limits. To occupy more than your fair share of space, particularly when others are clearly searching for a place to sit, can be perceived as a subtle display of dominance or disregard. This connects to a broader concept in psychology known as territorial behavior. We all possess an innate instinct to claim space, especially in environments that are unfamiliar or densely populated. But in public settings, that instinct must be managed. When someone places their bag on a seat during a busy period, it is often less about their own comfort and more about discouraging interaction. The unspoken message is clear: do not sit next to me. And people are adept at picking up on this. Research has shown that nonverbal cues, such as spreading out or avoiding eye contact, can significantly influence whether others feel welcome. This is not just about physical space. It is about emotional space as well. Removing your bag is not simply an act of making room, it is a signal of consideration. It communicates, I see you, and I acknowledge that this space does not belong exclusively to me. It fosters a sense of inclusion without a single word needing to be spoken. So, while it may seem like a minor gesture, it plays a significant role in how people experience fairness, respect, and a sense of shared community, one seat at a time. I let absence teach me as much as presence. Sometimes, the most articulate message is the one that is never spoken, and at other times, the most significant impact is left by what is no longer there. The idea that absence can teach as much as presence is a reminder that psychology operates not only in what is said and done, but also in what is withdrawn, what is missing, and what goes unsaid. Our brains are hardwired to recognize patterns, and when something disrupts a familiar pattern, we take notice, especially when it involves someone we are close to. Consider a person who consistently responds to your texts immediately, until one day they do not, or the regular patron at your favorite coffee shop who suddenly ceases to appear. These are not just missing elements of a routine. The absence itself becomes a piece of data. And from a psychological standpoint, our reaction to that absence reveals a great deal. How much we relied on that pattern, how much we valued that person, and even how comfortable we are with the unknown. In social psychology, this is connected to expectancy violation theory, the idea that we form expectations about how people will behave, and when those expectations are broken, we notice and reassess. But absence is more than just a disruption. It can be a profound teacher. It can show you who was quietly anchoring your daily life, which connections were truly reciprocal, and which were one-sided. It can reveal the extent to which you depend on certain habits or people without ever realizing it. Absence can also illuminate what does not cause pain, what we do not miss. That, too, is useful information. It helps us to adjust, to realign, and to focus our attention on what genuinely matters, not just on what we have become accustomed to. So, the next time someone vanishes from a rhythm you had grown comfortable with, pay attention, not with resentment but with curiosity. Absence may not always be a loss. Sometimes it is just a new form of clarity. A pun at the right moment can be an act of diplomacy. Imagine tensions are escalating in a meeting. Deadlines are looming, egos are becoming more prominent than reason, and the atmosphere in the room feels as if it could fracture at any moment. Then, someone says with a deadpan expression, "Let's not make a mountain out of a spreadsheet." The room erupts in a brief, light laugh. Not because the joke is particularly brilliant, but because its timing was perfect. That is the psychology of a well-placed pun. At its core, humor, especially in the form of light wordplay, can serve as a pressure release valve. When conflict is building or discomfort is lingering, a pun does more than just entertain. It diffuses the tension. In psychology, this is sometimes referred to as affiliative humor, humor that strengthens connections without targeting any individual. It signals a sense of safety, emotional intelligence, and, most importantly, perspective. We often think of diplomacy as a formal and cautious practice, but its softest forms are frequently its most effective. A timely pun can communicate, "We are all still human here," without directly challenging anyone's stated position. It resets the emotional tone of the room. The brain responds to puns in a curious manner. They create a momentary mismatch of expectations, which is then resolved through a clever recognition of the play on words. This minor cognitive disruption, followed by a moment of clarity, can trigger a small release of dopamine, which in turn can improve mood and even reduce defensiveness. But timing is critical. A pun delivered too early can seem dismissive. Too late, and it misses its opportunity. But when it is dropped at the right moment, especially in high stress or socially delicate situations, it becomes more than just a joke. It becomes a tool, a social bridge, a diplomatic nudge that invites everyone to relax and re-engage. Because sometimes, Preventing a situation from boiling over is not about saying the perfect, serious thing. It is about reminding the room that it is okay to breathe. Pain is not a contest. I never one-up vulnerability. Someone begins to open up about a painful experience, and before you realize it, you are sharing a story about how your own experience was even more difficult. Your intention might not be malicious. Perhaps you are simply trying to show that you can relate. But what is communicated can often feel like a competition. And that is the problem. The principle that pain is not a contest, and that one should never try to outdo another's vulnerability, is about respecting emotional space. When someone shares something challenging, they are lowering their defenses. That moment is not about you. It is about them. To one-up them, even without intending to, shifts the focus away from their pain and onto your own. It often leaves them feeling unseen, or as if their experience has been dismissed. Here is a straightforward example. Someone says, "I've been having a really hard time with my anxiety lately." A one-up response would sound like, "Oh, I know what you mean. Mine was so severe I couldn't leave my house for a month." While that may be true, the timing of the remark turns their act of sharing into a mere backdrop for your own story. Now, they are no longer being heard, they are being outmatched. A more appropriate response would be to remain focused on their experience, with something like, "That sounds incredibly difficult. I'm glad you felt you could tell me." This keeps the emotional spotlight where it belongs and allows them to express themselves fully, without interruption or comparison. From a psychological perspective, vulnerability requires a sense of safety. People are more willing to open up when they trust that the space will not be co-opted or judged. When we respond by attempting to match or surpass someone's pain, we can inadvertently make them feel small or silenced. Supporting someone in a moment of openness does not mean you must remain silent forever. It means giving them enough room for their story to fully land. And that space, even if it is just a few uninterrupted sentences, is where genuine connection begins. I strive to be the one who notices. In a bustling room, you might see someone who is quieter than usual. A colleague forgets their usual morning coffee. A friend does not respond to a message. Most people will not say anything. But one person might pause and gently check in. That is the one who notices. To be the one who notices is a simple yet powerful concept, deeply rooted in the psychology of attunement. It means being aware of the subtle emotional cues, the changes in tone, behavior, or expression, and responding with quiet care, rather than waiting for someone to explicitly state what is wrong. In psychology, this is connected to social sensitivity, the ability to perceive unspoken shifts in the emotional states of others. People often do not announce when they are struggling. They may downplay it, mask it, or simply say they are tired. When you notice these subtle changes and gently acknowledge what you are seeing, you create an opening for a real connection without demanding a full disclosure. This does not mean you should overanalyze or confront people. It means paying attention to the small details. Someone consistently skipping lunch, arriving late, or laughing less than they used to. Noticing might look like a simple, "Hey, just checking in on you," or asking, "Would you like to take a brief walk?" It is not about providing a solution. It is about signaling your presence. These small moments are what builds psychological safety, especially in relationships where people are afraid of being perceived as a burden. When someone feels seen without having to ask for it, it can reduce their sense of emotional isolation and strengthen the bonds of trust. In a professional setting, this kind of awareness contributes to better teamwork. In friendships, it deepens the connection over time. Being the one who notices does not require perfect timing or profound conversations. It simply means showing up in small, consistent ways, especially when others seem to be pulling back. And often, just noticing is the first step toward helping someone feel that they do not have to carry their burden all alone. I've learned that confidence is simply comfort with imperfection. You might assume that confidence stems from being flawless, from having the perfect speech, the perfect answers, and the perfect timing. But genuine confidence does not come from getting everything right. It comes from being at ease when you do not. The idea that confidence is comfort with imperfection is about psychological flexibility, the ability to remain grounded and self-assured, even when things go slightly awry. In our daily lives, the people who appear to be the most confident are not necessarily the most skilled. They are simply less disturbed by their own mistakes. This manifests in all sorts of situations. A speaker who stumbles over a word, smiles, and continues on. A manager who can admit they do not have the answer without losing their authority. These moments may not be polished, but they are powerful because they demonstrate a sense of calm under pressure. In psychology, this is linked to self-efficacy, which is the belief in your own ability to handle challenges. Confident individuals do not expect to be perfect. They trust in their capacity to adapt, to recover, and to remain effective even with their flaws. And that mindset fundamentally changes how others perceive them. Someone who can laugh off a minor misstep or correct an error without becoming defensive often feels more trustworthy than someone who tries to conceal their mistakes. This also influences how people approach risk. When you are not afraid of being imperfect, you are more willing to try new things, to speak up, and to continue learning. Because failure no longer feels like a threat to your self-worth. It is simply a part of the process. Culturally, confidence is often confused with being loud or overly certain, but in practice, it is usually a quiet quality. It looks like being relaxed while you are learning, open when you are unsure, and calm when you are facing criticism. It is not about being invulnerable. It is about being real and still moving forward. And that kind of confidence tends to be more enduring because it does not depend on perfect conditions. It builds its strength through the cracks. Representation is an invitation. I try to widen the lens. Who you see in the picture tells you who is intended to be in the room. Representation is not merely about visibility. It is about fostering psychological safety. When people see individuals who look like them, sound like them, or come from a similar background holding positions of influence or respect, it sends a powerful message. You belong here too. In psychology, this is connected to social identity theory, which explains how our sense of self is shaped by the groups with which we identify. If those reflections are absent, it becomes more difficult to envision your own place in the narrative. It is why a child's face lights up when they encounter a teacher who shares their heritage. It is why diversity in the workplace is not just a matter of checking a box. It is a signal that opportunity is not confined by one's background. Representation also has a direct effect on performance. Research has demonstrated that when people feel underrepresented, especially in high-pressure environments, they may experience what is known as stereotype threat, a psychological burden that can actually diminish their outcomes simply because they feel out of place. But when the environment reflects a broad spectrum of identities, that pressure is alleviated, focus sharpens, and confidence grows. To widen the lens does not mean engaging in tokenism. It means intentionally designing our systems, our stories, and our spaces to mirror the full range of human experience, not just the most conventional or comfortable versions. Whether it is on a stage, in a leadership position, or on the written page, inclusion is not a passive state. It is actively constructed. Every time we make a choice about who to feature in an advertisement, a film, a panel discussion, or a curriculum, we are not just reflecting reality. We are actively shaping it. And when the lens includes more, the invitation reaches further. I am careful not to meet someone's softness with structure. An individual begins to open up, perhaps with some hesitation, a little vulnerable, and the response they receive is like a checklist. Have you tried this? Here is what you should do. This is what occurs when softness is met with structure. The intention may be good, to offer help, to provide clarity, to solve the problem. But in moments of emotional openness, structure often feels like a shutdown. It substitutes control for connection and planning for presence. When someone shares something personal, a fear, a hope, even a fleeting frustration, they are often not searching for a solution. They are testing the waters. Do I feel safe here? Can I trust this moment? To offer structure too quickly, such as a solution or an analysis, can feel like closing the door they have just summoned the courage to open. Psychologically, this is about emotional attunement, the ability to discern what someone genuinely needs beneath the surface of their words. If someone is speaking softly, tentatively, or with visible emotion, their nervous system is likely seeking regulation through connection, not correction. Matching that energy with warmth, quiet support, or even just attentive listening helps to build trust. This does not mean you can never be helpful. It means that help comes later. First, you must mirror the tone. If someone shares softly, you respond with softness. If they offer vulnerability, you hold it gently, not with an action plan, but with understanding. We all tend to default to what we are skilled at. Some of us offer logic, others offer empathy. But matching the tone, especially when someone leads with softness, is a skill that builds deeper relationships and greater emotional safety. Because not every quiet truth is a request for action. Sometimes it is just a test. Will you meet me here, or will you try to move me somewhere else? And how we respond can determine whether that person will open up again or not. I decline in the same way I would want to be declined. No one enjoys being told no, but the manner in which it is communicated can make a world of difference. This is the core of the principle. Decline as you would wish to be declined. In the field of psychology, this is a concept deeply rooted in empathy and social reciprocity, the practice of treating others as you would want to be treated if your roles were reversed. A refusal does not need to be sharp, dismissive, or uncomfortable. In fact, a thoughtfully delivered no can actually fortify trust, as it demonstrates honesty combined with genuine care. It is not just about the word no, it is about the entire delivery. When someone asks for your assistance, your time, or your participation, and you are unable to agree, the way you respond is crucial. A vague or curt "I can't" can feel like a rejection of the person, not just of their request. However, a response such as, "I truly appreciate you considering me for this. At this time, I am unable to commit, but I would be very interested in being involved on another occasion," conveys the same message with both clarity and respect. This approach is applicable across various contexts, professional settings, friendships, and social invitations. Declining with warmth and specificity shows that you are not trying to avoid the person, but rather the specific task or timing. From a psychological standpoint, this helps to maintain relational trust, the sense that even when you establish boundaries, the underlying connection remains valued, and it operates in reverse as well. When you decline with kindness, you are modeling how you would want someone to respond to your own requests. This establishes a tone of mutual understanding for future interactions. From a behavioral viewpoint, practicing considerate refusals can also help to mitigate patterns of people-pleasing. It proves that setting boundaries does not have to be a cold or guilt-ridden process. It can be both clear and compassionate. Ultimately, saying no is an unavoidable part of life, but when it is done with empathy and respect, it becomes more than a simple refusal. It becomes a message of mutual dignity, and that is something people will remember long after they have forgotten the no itself. I show appreciation, even when no one is watching. Sometimes the most meaningful expression of gratitude is the one that no one else hears. It is not because it lacks significance, but because it was never intended to be noticed. This is the quiet power of appreciation, and in psychology, it plays a far more substantial role than you might imagine. Appreciation is not merely a social custom. It is connected to a psychological mechanism known as reinforcement. When a particular behavior is acknowledged, it is more likely to be repeated. But this reinforcement does not always require an audience. Expressing gratitude, even when the other person is not present, still shapes your perception of the world and the relationships you are a part of. Research in the field of positive psychology has shown that individuals who cultivate a habit of gratitude, even in private, tend to experience a higher level of emotional well-being. This is because the practice of appreciation shifts our focus away from what is lacking and toward what is working. Over time, this can rewire the brain's default mode of attention, making you more attuned to the small, meaningful moments that others might overlook. But appreciation also serves to strengthen our connections. When you express thanks to someone who is often overlooked, a janitor, a delivery driver, or a teammate who handles the less glamorous tasks, you are reinforcing their intrinsic worth, not just their functional role. And even if they never hear your words, you have noticed their contribution. This deepens your own capacity for empathy and encourages pro-social behavior, actions taken to benefit others, even at no direct personal gain. This is not about performative gratitude or public declarations of praise. It is about building the internal habit of noticing contributions and assigning them value. Whether it is complimenting an effort, recognizing a pattern of kindness, or simply pausing to appreciate someone's role in your day, these moments shape how you present yourself to the world. Psychologically speaking, appreciation does not have to be loud. It just has to be real. Even in silence, it still has its effect. I imagine invisible traffic lines in every hallway. You do not need a stop sign to recognize when to pause in a crowded corridor. Without conscious thought, most of us naturally drift to one side, give space to others, and maintain a pace that aligns with the general flow of movement. It is not a written rule, but we tend to adhere to it. This is the essence of imagining invisible traffic lines in every hallway. This concept is drawn from the fields of social psychology and behavioral norms, the unspoken rules we follow in our shared spaces. Much like the lanes on a road, we mentally map out how to navigate through narrow areas without colliding with others. These invisible lines help to minimize chaos and preserve social harmony in tight communal environments. It is why walking on the wrong side of a hallway can feel strangely disruptive. Even if no one says a word, people might subtly alter their path or give you a brief look. That is a norm violation in action. We subconsciously sense when someone is not following the established flow. What is particularly interesting is how swiftly these traffic lines adapt to the local culture. In countries where driving is on the left, people often walk on that side as well. In schools or office buildings, the flow might shift depending on the location of doors or staircases. Our brains quickly learn and mirror the prevailing pattern, a form of behavioral mimicry that keeps everyone moving smoothly. And the benefit of this extends beyond mere courtesy. It lowers social friction, improves the efficiency of crowd movement, and prevents unnecessary stress. When you are in sync with the flow, you are not just moving through a space. You are acknowledging the presence of others within it. It is a subtle form of social cooperation. Simply by imagining those invisible lines, you help to make public spaces feel a little more respectful and a little more human. I've learned to mirror feelings first. The solutions can come later. A friend might say, "I'm just so weary of everything at the moment." Before they have even finished their thought, your mind is already generating a list of potential remedies. Getting more rest, taking a walk, perhaps planning a holiday. This response is almost instinctual. However, in that specific moment, what they likely required was something entirely different: to feel that they were understood. The principle of mirroring feelings before offering fixes is straightforward yet profoundly effective. When people are grappling with emotional difficulties, their immediate need is seldom for advice. It is for validation. This means demonstrating that you have heard the emotion they are expressing, not just the words they are using. Mirroring someone's feelings is not about mindlessly repeating what they have said. It involves identifying and reflecting the emotion they are conveying in a calm and clear manner. If someone shares, "I feel like I'm completely stuck," a mirrored response would be, "That sounds incredibly frustrating." There are no suggestions offered yet, only acknowledgement. What this accomplishes is the lowering of emotional barriers. When a person feels genuinely seen and comprehended, they become more receptive to conversation and eventually to considering solutions. If you bypass this step and move directly to "here's what you should do," your words can come across as dismissive, no matter how well-intentioned. This approach taps into a fundamental human requirement for emotional validation. We all have a need to know that our feelings are coherent to someone else. Once that is established, the mind begins to settle, making it easier for individuals to process their thoughts and contemplate their next steps. Mirroring feelings is not a complex skill, but it does require conscious awareness. You must listen not just for the facts, but for the tone, the energy, and the underlying emotion. It is the pause that precedes the plan, and that small pause has the power to shift the entire trajectory of a conversation for the better. What you choose to do when no one is looking is, ultimately, who you are. A great many of our choices are made when there is no one around to observe them. Holding the elevator door for someone who is approaching, returning a shopping cart to its proper place, turning off a light in an unoccupied room. These decisions may seem minor, perhaps even invisible, but they quietly reveal something significant. Psychologists refer to this as private morality, the alignment between our internal values and our external actions, especially when there is no reward, punishment, or recognition involved. In other words, it is about doing the right thing when no one is watching. And these moments can be some of the most honest reflections of our true character. When the pressure of social observation is removed, what remains is our internal drive. Behavioral science calls this intrinsic motivation, the impulse to act based on our personal values rather than on external incentives. For example, someone might recycle not because they are afraid of a fine, but because they genuinely care about the environment. Or they might choose not to participate in gossip because they value trust, not because anyone is keeping score. Interestingly, researchers have found that when people believe their actions are being monitored, they tend to behave more pro-socially, more generously, more fairly. But when that spotlight is removed, some individuals change their behavior entirely, while others remain consistent. This difference often comes down to something called self-concept clarity, how clearly a person understands and commits to their own values across various situations. Integrity is not always about grand, sweeping decisions. It often manifests in the quietest of moments, the ones with no audience, no credit, and no applause. These moments are what build our habits, and our habits are what shape our character. So, while our public choices might tell others who we are, our private ones tell us. And psychology shows that the more closely these two align, the more stable and genuine our behavior becomes. It is not about achieving perfection. It is about being consistent, even when the room is empty. I use emojis to soften, not to dodge clarity. You have likely encountered this yourself. A message that simply says, "We need to talk," versus one that says, "We need to talk," followed by a smiling face. The words are identical, but the feeling is entirely different. This is the quiet power of the emoji. They are not just decorative, they are emotional signals. And when used effectively, they can soften a tone, reduce friction, and bring clarity to otherwise flat text. But when they are misused, they can create the very opposite: confusion, avoidance, and even a sense of distrust. The core principle here is straightforward. An emoji should add warmth, not obscure the message. In psychology, this is related to how we interpret tone in digital communication. In the absence of facial expressions or vocal cues, our brains are left to fill in the blanks. This is where misunderstandings thrive. Adding a well-placed emoji, such as a thumbs up or a simple smile, can bridge that gap. It is a cue that says, this message is intended to be friendly even if the words are brief or direct. This is particularly useful in work-related chats, group texts, or any situation where the tone might be easily misread. But there is a flip side: using emojis to mask what you are actually trying to say. If you are delivering difficult news, providing constructive feedback, or establishing a firm boundary, peppering your message with too many hearts or smiling faces can feel evasive. It blurs the message instead of clarifying it. Effective communication, even with the aid of emojis, is about finding a balance. Be warm, but be honest. Soften the delivery, but do not smudge the meaning. An emoji should not be a substitute for clarity. It should be a support for it. In the end, emojis are simply a form of modern punctuation, a digital nod, a gentle hand on the shoulder of the message. When used with care, they can humanize our communication. When overused or misplaced, they can leave people guessing. I use them to connect, not to hide. I own the typo, then I fix it publicly. You press send, and then you see it. A glaring typographical error in an important email or message. It is easy to feel a surge of panic, to ignore it, or to quietly hope that no one will notice. But there is a more intelligent course of action. Own the typo, and then correct it publicly. From a psychological standpoint, this taps into the concept of impression management, which is how we shape others' perceptions of us. Mistakes, especially small, visible ones, can feel like a threat to our perceived competence. But research has shown that acknowledging them, particularly with a sense of calm and a touch of humor, often makes us appear more trustworthy, not less. When you point out your own error and then openly correct it, you are demonstrating two things: accountability and self-assurance. You are not pretending to be flawless. You are showing that you value accuracy more than you value your own ego. This approach is effective in professional settings, in classrooms, and even on social media. Let's say you post a graphic with a misspelled word. Fixing it quietly might keep things looking tidy, but owning it in the comments section, "Yes, we saw it. Yes, we cringed. It's fixed now," makes you relatable. It communicates to your audience that you are human, not hiding. At work, correcting a presentation slide or resending an updated report with a simple note like, "Caught an error. Here's the corrected version," builds credibility. It signals that you are paying attention and are willing to make adjustments without unnecessary drama. From a psychological perspective, this reflects a concept known as psychological flexibility. It is the ability to adapt your behavior without collapsing under the fear of being wrong. That is a trait that people respect, especially in leaders, educators, and communicators. Owning your small public mistakes does not damage your reputation. Avoiding them, denying them, or acting as if they never happened often does. Fixing them openly is more than just a correction. It is character in action. I design rooms and conversations with ramps. Not everyone enters a room or a conversation at the same pace. In physical architecture, ramps are about providing access. They allow more people to enter a space with ease, without the need to ask for assistance. The same principle applies to human interaction. Some individuals require a bit more time to adjust, to observe, or to feel welcome before they are ready to engage. In psychology, this is connected to concepts like processing speed, social anxiety, and even the distinction between introversion and extroversion. People have different thresholds for feeling safe, seen, or prepared to participate. When we design our spaces or our social settings without taking this into account, we can inadvertently leave people behind. To create a ramp in a conversation might mean starting with something light or observational before moving on to deeper topics. In a meeting, it could involve providing the agenda ahead of time or beginning with a check-in round instead of immediately diving into decisions. For physical spaces, it might mean using softer lighting, providing clearer signage, or arranging seating in a way that feels naturally inclusive rather than hierarchical. The intention is not to slow things down for everyone. It is to create a space where more people can find their footing. The goal is to facilitate fluency, allowing people to move into participation smoothly without feeling the need to over-explain themselves or to catch up midstream. Inclusion is often not about grand gestures. It is about subtle design choices that reduce friction. When you add a ramp, you are not lowering the standards. You are raising the level of access. Whether it is a group chat, a classroom, or a community event, the question becomes, can more people enter here with a sense of dignity? Because the more welcoming your design, whether it is social or physical, the more human your space becomes. I let people grieve without trying to tidy it. Grief does not adhere to a neat and orderly schedule. It does not show up politely or wrap itself up in a few well-written paragraphs. But when we witness someone grieving, our immediate instinct is often to try to tidy it up, to say something comforting, to redirect their focus, or to help them move forward. The principle of letting people grieve without tidying it is about making room for emotions that are messy, unpredictable, and profoundly human. In psychology, grief is not seen as a problem to be solved. It is a process that people move through in their own way and at their own pace. Attempting to organize someone else's grief by offering solutions or reframing their situation can actually make things more difficult. When you say things like, "They are in a better place now," or, "At least you had the chance to say goodbye," you may have the best of intentions, but what is often communicated is, "Your pain is making me uncomfortable, so I need to package it into something more manageable." To let someone grieve without tidying it means allowing them to cry, to talk in circles, to fall silent, or to feel stuck without trying to rush them out of it. It is about being present without attempting to manage their emotions. No pep talks, no silver linings, just your presence. For example, if a friend is going through a breakup or a loss, you do not have to search for the perfect thing to say. You can simply say, "I am here if you need to talk," and mean it. That kind of steady, unwavering support gives them the space to process what they are feeling, instead of feeling pressured to perform as if they are okay. Grief often feels chaotic from the inside. The most supportive thing you can do is not to make it smaller or cleaner than it really is. Just let it be what it is, and let them know that you will stay with them through it. I let people cancel, with no guilt required. Sometimes plans simply fall through. Someone sends a last-minute text to cancel a dinner reservation, to reschedule a meeting, or to say that they are just not feeling up to it today. And even if you understand, a small part of you might feel let down, or worse, annoyed. But here is the thing. Allowing someone to cancel without imposing guilt is not just an act of kindness. It is psychologically wise. Our brains are wired for social connection, but they are also wired for self-preservation. When someone cancels, especially with an honest reason like exhaustion, stress, or anxiety, they are choosing honesty over performance. That is not a betrayal of the relationship. It is a sign of trust. To respond with frustration or guilt, even subtly, teaches the other person to mask what they truly need. Over time, this can chip away at their sense of emotional safety. People will begin to show up when they are running on empty, not because they want to, but because they are afraid not to. To let someone cancel freely creates the opposite effect. It builds trust. It signals that your relationship is not contingent on constant availability or perfect timing. And that is particularly important for those who struggle with burnout, social anxiety, or chronic overwhelm. It is also worth noting that many people will over-apologize when they cancel, even if they have done nothing wrong. That is not because they are inconsiderate. It is because they have likely been made to feel guilty for it in the past. Meeting that moment with a sense of calm and no-pressure reassurance helps to undo that learned fear. Of course, it is perfectly acceptable to feel disappointed, but we can hold that disappointment quietly, without layering it onto someone else. In the long run, flexibility strengthens a connection more than forced presence ever could, because the relationships that last are not built on flawless attendance. They are built on mutual understanding. Letting someone step back without shame is not a sign of weakness. It is one of the strongest signals of care we can give. I ask if they want advice or just space. Someone begins to open up to you about a difficult day, and before they have even finished their sentence, you are already suggesting solutions. It is an instinctive reaction. You want to be helpful, but sometimes trying to fix things too quickly can do more harm than good. The psychology behind asking if someone wants advice or just space is about giving people a sense of control over how they process their own emotions. When someone shares a personal struggle, it can feel like an invitation to jump in with your ideas, tips, or encouragement. But not everyone is looking for that. In fact, many people simply want to be heard, not helped. By asking a simple question like, "Do you want some advice? Or do you just want to talk it out?" you are giving the other person the opportunity to guide the conversation in the direction they need. It is a small question, but it shifts the entire dynamic. Instead of assuming what would be most helpful, you are offering a choice, and that choice creates a sense of emotional safety. For example, a friend might say, "I am feeling completely overwhelmed at work." A typical response might be, "You should really take a break, or maybe talk to your manager." That is advice. But if they were not yet ready for solutions, it can feel dismissive. Now, compare that with, "Do you want to just vent for a bit, or are you looking to figure something out?" This lets them decide the direction of the conversation. Psychologically, this demonstrates empathy in action. You're not just responding to what was said, you're responding to what was needed. It reduces the likelihood of miscommunication, lowers the chance of defensiveness, and makes it easier for people to open up again in the future. It is a simple question, but it builds emotional intelligence on both sides. And over time, this one habit can completely change how supported people feel in your presence. I protect what is sacred, even when it is subtle. Some of the most important things in life do not announce themselves with great fanfare. A quiet morning ritual, a shared inside joke, the comfortable silence in a familiar space. These things are not grand or obvious, but they have weight. And that is the heart of this idea. To protect what is sacred, even when it is subtle. In psychology, this touches upon the concept of meaning-making. Human beings have a natural tendency to assign value to moments, habits, and gestures that may appear ordinary on the surface but carry a deep emotional or symbolic significance underneath. When those things are overlooked, interrupted, or dismissed, it can feel as though something small has been broken and something significant has been ignored. Take, for example, the friend who always calls you during their evening walk. It is not officially labeled as a ritual, but it is one. Or the coworker who arranges their desk in the exact same way every morning, not because it is the most efficient, but because it brings them a sense of calm. These moments are not dramatic, but they are meaningful. And when others fail to see their value, it can create a subtle kind of disconnection. To protect these things means to notice them, to respect them, and not to brush them off simply because they are quiet. It might mean holding space for a weekly habit, even when schedules become hectic, or allowing a moment to breathe instead of rushing to fill it with noise. It is about honoring the things that stabilize us, not just the things that entertain or impress us. Over time, these subtle, sacred elements build a strong foundation. They communicate to people, "This matters. You matter." And when those messages are repeated, not with loud proclamations but with quiet consistency, they become a form of care that is harder to shake than any grand gesture. Because the sacred is not always ceremonial. Sometimes it is just quietly woven into the rhythm of our ordinary lives. And recognizing that is what makes a connection last. I don't solve the pain before I have heard it. Someone says, "I have been feeling really overwhelmed lately." And within a matter of seconds, you are already offering a list of tips. Get more sleep. Practice better time management. Maybe try a new routine. It feels as though you are being helpful, but in reality, you may be skipping over the most crucial part of the process. The idea of not solving the pain before you have truly heard it is about pacing your support. When people open up, especially about something difficult, they are not always prepared for immediate solutions. In fact, jumping straight to advice can often make them feel ignored or misunderstood. At its core, this concept is about listening fully and patiently before you respond. Most people do not lead with their entire story. They test the waters by sharing a small piece of it. If the listener rushes in to fix it right away, the speaker may pull back, feeling as though their pain was too quickly dismissed or oversimplified. Imagine someone says, "I've been feeling a bit lost at work." A solution-driven response might be, "You should update your resume or start looking for a mentor." But a "hear it first" response would sound more like, "That sounds really frustrating. Do you want to talk more about it?" This approach leaves space for the rest of the story to come forward. From a psychological perspective, this is about providing emotional validation. Before a person can effectively process advice, they need to feel that their emotions are being seen and accepted. If that step is skipped, even the most well-intentioned advice can feel cold or out of touch. Listening to the whole picture without interrupting, redirecting, or rushing allows someone to actually feel heard. And once that happens, they become far more open to reflection, problem solving, or making a change. It is not about avoiding solutions altogether. It is about waiting until the person is ready to hear them. Because support works best when it follows understanding, not when it tries to outrun it. I pronounce names correctly, even if I have to ask twice. A name is more than just a collection of letters. It is a person's primary identity. Getting someone's name right may seem like a small gesture, but psychologically, it signals something much deeper: recognition, respect, and genuine care. When you mispronounce a name or avoid using it altogether, you risk sending a message, even unintentionally, that the effort is not worth your time. In psychology, this taps into the concept of social belonging. Studies have shown that when people hear their name spoken correctly, especially in diverse environments, it increases their sense of inclusion and personal value. On the flip side, repeated mispronunciations, particularly after a correction has been made, can chip away at a person's confidence, especially in professional or academic settings. Names often carry with them a rich cultural history, a sense of family pride, or a deep personal significance. To ignore that, or to flatten it into something that is easier for you to say, does not just make communication smoother, it can sometimes erase a part of someone's story. That is why asking for the correct pronunciation and repeating it until you get it right is so important. It is not about achieving perfection on the first try. It is about making the effort. And that effort is always noticed. Whether it is in a classroom, a meeting, or during introductions at a party, those extra 2 seconds you take to clarify a name show that you are truly listening, that you are treating people as individuals, not just as participants. You would not want your own name to be mangled in every interaction. And for many people, that is not an occasional slip-up. It is a daily occurrence. When you take the time to learn someone's name and say it correctly, you're not just addressing them, you are including them. And sometimes, inclusion begins with a single, well-pronounced syllable. I zoom out. Will this matter in 5 years? You miss a deadline. You say the wrong thing in a meeting. You spill coffee on your shirt right before a major presentation. In the moment, it can feel like a catastrophe. But psychology offers a simple tool to help you reset your perspective. Zoom out. Will this still matter in 5 years? This idea is built on the concept of temporal distancing, a mental strategy that helps you regulate your emotions by shifting how you think about time. When you imagine how you will view the current problem in the future, it often shrinks the emotional intensity of the moment. What feels urgent and overwhelming now often looks much smaller when placed within a broader timeline. In high-stress situations, the brain has a tendency to narrow its focus, a process known as attentional narrowing. That is why even minor setbacks can feel all-consuming. You become so focused on the discomfort or embarrassment that it feels as if it defines everything. But when you mentally step back and picture your life months or even years from now, the problem begins to lose its grip. For example, a failed job interview might sting today. But when you zoom out, you see it as just one data point in a much longer story, one that often leads to a better fit down the road. The awkward conversation you had last week has likely already been forgotten by the other person, and soon it will be forgotten by you as well. This technique is not about dismissing your emotions. It is about contextualizing them. It helps to build emotional resilience, which is the ability to bounce back by separating temporary discomfort from lasting consequences. Practicing this kind of long-view thinking can rewire how you respond to setbacks. It teaches your brain to sort frustration from genuine crisis and reminds you that most problems tend to shrink with distance. That shift in perspective is not just calming. It is a way to stay grounded while everything feels momentarily out of proportion. I introduce people by what they share, not by what they lack. Imagine you are at a party, and two friends from different parts of your life are finally meeting. You might say, "This is Ella, she doesn't drink," or "This is Marcus, he's not from around here." The intention is casual, but whether we realize it or not, we have just introduced someone by what they are not. Psychologically, this taps into what is known as framing bias. The way we present information can shape how it is perceived. When you define someone by an absence, even unintentionally, it colors how others see them. It narrows their impression before a single word has been exchanged. Now, contrast that with, "Ela loves live music," or "Marcus is really into vintage film cameras." These introductions are not just more engaging, they offer a potential starting point for a connection. Instead of leading with a point of difference, you're opening with a shared curiosity. In social psychology, this aligns with the common in-group identity theory. People are more likely to empathize, cooperate, and build rapport when they feel a sense of similarity. So, when your introductions emphasize common interests or values, you are not just being polite. You are creating a shortcut to a sense of belonging. The mistake is not in acknowledging a difference. It is in leading with it. Saying that someone is not from the area or does not eat meat may be factually correct, but it subtly positions them as an outsider. And our brains are wired to pick up on that framing, even if the person speaking had the best of intentions. Introducing people by what they share is not about ignoring their differences. It is about choosing a starting line that draws people in, rather than pushing them to the edge. It is a small tweak with surprisingly significant effects, because in the first few seconds of meeting someone, people are looking for reasons to connect. And how you frame those few seconds can make all the difference. I curate memories, not just milestones. A birthday, a graduation, a wedding. These are the milestones. They are the dates we circle on our calendars, the ones that people tend to remember. But psychology suggests a practice that is even more powerful. Do not just chase the milestones, curate the memories. Milestones are external markers. They show us what happened. But memories show us how it felt. And in the long run, how we feel about our lives matters far more than what we can list on a resume. This is where the psychology of memory comes into play. Our memory is not a perfect, objective record. It is selective. Our brains hold on to experiences that are emotionally rich, not just socially significant. Psychologists call this the reminiscence bump, the tendency to remember meaningful, vivid moments, often from our early adulthood, that stand out not because of the event itself, but because of the emotional connection we attach to it. So for example, a small dinner with a few close friends may outlast the memory of a large, formal banquet. A spontaneous road trip can leave a deeper and more lasting imprint than the official vacation that came with a packed itinerary. The key is intentional encoding. This means giving your full attention to a moment while it is happening, not just taking a picture of it. It means being present, both emotionally and mentally, so that your brain recognizes the experience as something worth storing. This is especially relevant in a world that places such a high emphasis on performance and productivity. We often chase our goals so quickly that we forget to slow down and take mental snapshots, not just ones with our phones. But research shows that emotionally salient moments, not just big achievements, contribute more to our sense of fulfillment and identity over time. Curating memories is about making room for meaning, not just checking off boxes. It is what turns our ordinary time into something truly worth remembering. I stay until the story is finished. Someone begins to tell you about a difficult moment, something they have been holding on to, and halfway through, your phone buzzes or your mind starts to wander. You might nod and say something supportive, but mentally, you are already somewhere else. It is a subtle shift, but it sends a clear signal. Their story does not deserve your full attention. The principle of staying until the story is finished is about more than just patience. It is about presence. In psychology, when someone shares a vulnerable experience, they are engaging in an act that involves risk. They are gauging whether the space is safe, whether you will stay with them through the discomfort, or whether you will check out halfway through. When a story is emotional or deeply personal, it does not always come out smoothly. People may pause, lose their words, or backtrack. That does not mean they are finished. It means they are still processing as they speak. To jump in too early with advice, conclusions, or a change of topic can shut down what could have been a meaningful connection. For example, someone might start telling you about a falling out they had with a family member. Mid-sentence, they might pause or say, "It's stupid. Never mind." This is the moment to stay, not to agree that it is stupid and move on. Staying means gently waiting, signaling with your posture or a short, "I'm listening," that it is okay for them to continue. Psychologically, this reinforces a sense of emotional safety. It tells the speaker that their words matter, even if they arrive slowly or awkwardly. And it encourages future openness, because people remember when they felt truly heard. Holding your attention for just a little longer than feels necessary can make a significant difference. Often, the most honest part of a story comes right after the moment when most people would tune out. Staying until it is finished does not just show respect. It is how trust is built. I spot the single player in the multiplayer lobby. You are in a group chat. Everyone is cracking jokes, sharing memes, and the energy feels collaborative and shared, except for one person who keeps replying with off-topic rants or dominating every thread as if it were a solo performance. That is the single player in a multiplayer lobby. In psychology, this type of behavior is related to social attunement, the ability to align your actions with the mood, pace, and purpose of a group. When someone treats a group dynamic like a personal monologue, it is often a sign of low social synchrony, a disconnect between their personal needs and the rhythm of the group. Sometimes this happens because a person is simply unaware of how they are being perceived. They may be feeling anxious, overly excited, or just misreading the room. In other cases, it can reflect something called egocentric communication, where the speaker's focus remains entirely on their own experience, without adjusting to how others are responding. To spot this dynamic does not mean to judge it. It means to notice when the flow of the interaction breaks. In team meetings, it is the person who continues to talk long past their allotted time. In friend groups, it is the one who hijacks every story to tell one of their own. They are not necessarily trying to be disruptive. They might not even realize that the group is a shared space. Understanding this dynamic is important because smooth social interaction depends on turn-taking, empathy, and mutual awareness. When just one person is playing by a different set of rules, it puts pressure on everyone else to either accommodate them or to disengage. Recognizing when someone is playing solo in a group setting is not about calling them out. It is about finding small ways to bring them back into the fold, through gentle cues, redirection, or by offering them space without completely isolating them, because multiplayer works best when everyone remembers that they are not alone at the controls. I replace "let me know" with a specific offer. When someone is going through a difficult time, it is natural to want to offer help. So we say, "Let me know if you need anything." It sounds thoughtful, but it rarely leads to any action. That is because in moments of stress, vague offers can feel more like a source of pressure than a source of support. The psychology behind this comes down to cognitive load, the mental effort that is required to process information, make plans, and come to decisions. When people are feeling overwhelmed, even simple tasks, like trying to figure out what kind of help to ask for, can feel exhausting. So when you say, "Let me know," your intention is kind, but the burden of figuring out how to respond shifts back onto them. To replace that phrase with a specific offer significantly lowers the barrier to entry. It transforms support from something abstract into something they can actually use. For example, instead of saying, "Let me know if you need any help," you could say, "I can bring over some dinner on Tuesday night. Would that be helpful?" Or, I'm free on Friday. Do you want me to take the kids for a few hours? These kinds of offers work better because they require less decision-making on their part. The person does not have to scan through a list of options or feel awkward about making a request. All they need to do is accept or decline. Either way, it gives them back some of their energy. This idea also taps into what is known as proactive empathy, a type of support where you anticipate someone's needs instead of waiting for them to ask. It shows that you are not just available, you are paying attention. Offering something concrete is one of the simplest ways to make kindness more effective. It turns well-meaning words into something genuinely useful. And when someone is already doing their best just to stay afloat, removing even one decision from their plate can feel like a real and tangible relief. I merge like a zipper, not like a joust. You have probably been in this situation before. 2 lanes of traffic are merging into one, and everyone either speeds up to cut ahead or slams on their brakes to avoid a collision. But there is a much smoother way to handle this. And it is not just about driving. It is about how we navigate any shared space, whether it is on the road, in a workplace, or in our everyday lives. The idea is simple. Merge like a zipper, not like a joust. In the field of traffic psychology, this is known as zipper merging, and it is not just a matter of being polite, it is also more efficient. When each car takes a turn at the merge point, it helps to reduce congestion and frustration. But the psychology behind it reflects something deeper: how we manage fairness, cooperation, and social flow. People often treat merging as a contest, racing to be the first, or actively blocking others out. That mindset taps into our competitive social dynamics, where we view limited space or opportunity as something to be guarded or conquered. But psychology shows that cooperation, even in these small interactions, can increase trust and reduce stress. The zipper model relies on a sense of mutual awareness. Each side gives a little, and that is what makes the system work. It is not about dominance, but about reciprocal concession. This principle applies to conversations as well. Think of a group discussion where people alternate speaking instead of one person monopolizing the airtime, or a meeting where contributions flow freely because people feel heard rather than overridden. To merge like a zipper is a reminder that systems, whether they are mechanical or social, run better when everyone understands the importance of timing, respect, and shared movement. It is not about slowing down or giving up your space. It is about syncing with others so that no one has to fight just to belong. And that small shift, whether on the road or in a room, makes everything run more smoothly. Not because one side wins, but because both sides are able to move forward together. I don't interrupt joy with skepticism. When someone's eyes light up as they talk about a new idea, a plan, or a small victory, they are sharing more than just information. They are inviting you into their excitement. The principle of not interrupting joy with skepticism is a reminder to be careful with how we respond to other people's enthusiasm. It is easy to jump in with questions, concerns, or caveats. And often, this comes from a good place. We want to be realistic, helpful, or protective. But in that moment, those reactions can feel more like resistance than support. Joy is a fragile thing, especially in its early stages. When someone shares something that makes them feel alive, they are in a vulnerable state. To cut that down with a doubtful, "Are you sure that will work?" or a dismissive, "That's been done before," can feel like a splash of cold water on a warm moment. This does not mean you should abandon critical thinking entirely. There's a time and a place for questions. But early joy, especially the kind that people share freely, is not always asking for feedback. It is asking for a witness. When you respond with a sense of shared energy, even with just a small smile or a simple, "That's awesome," you help to build emotional safety. And that safety, in turn, encourages openness, creativity, and a deeper level of trust. Consider a child who is excitedly explaining a wild new invention. The worst thing you could do is to immediately correct the physics. Adults are no different. We still need space to dream before we have to edit. The psychology is simple. Joy fuels motivation. To interrupt it with doubt too early can shut someone down before they have even started. So, let the joy breathe. There will be room later for reality checks, but first, meet the moment where it is. Alive, excited, and full of hope. I lead with questions, not with conclusions. You're in a conversation, and something feels off. Maybe a comment lands the wrong way, or the other person sounds distant. Without even thinking about it, your mind starts to construct a story about their attitude, their motives, or what they must be thinking. It happens quickly, and it often feels true, but it is not always accurate. To lead with questions, not with conclusions, is about slowing down that process. In psychology, we have a tendency to make what are called attributions, mental shortcuts that help us explain other people's behavior. The problem is, we usually assume intent based on very limited information, and those assumptions can derail a conversation before it has even really begun. Instead of saying, "You're angry with me, aren't you?" a question-first approach would sound more like, "Did I say something that came out wrong?" This does not accuse, it invites. That small difference can turn a tense exchange into an opportunity for clarity. This works especially well in all kinds of relationships, personal, professional, or otherwise. If a coworker misses a deadline, your reflex might be to assume laziness or a lack of interest. But leading with a question, such as, "Was there something that got in the way?" opens the door to a context that you might not have considered. To ask first shows that you are prioritizing understanding over judgment. It also lowers the defensiveness of the person you are talking to. When people feel safe from blame, they are more likely to be honest, and the conversation becomes productive rather than reactive. This shift does not require a dramatic change in your behavior, just a habit of pausing before you apply a label. Replace your assumptions with curiosity. That one habit can make difficult conversations smoother and good conversations even more meaningful. I hold the elevator, even if I am in a rush. You are stepping into an elevator. You are running late. The doors are beginning to close. And just as they are about to shut, you see someone rounding the corner. You have a choice. Press the open button or let it slide shut. Holding the elevator, even when you are in a hurry, is a small act, but it reveals a great deal about how we balance our personal sense of urgency with our capacity for social empathy. Psychologically, this taps into what is known as pro-social behavior, actions that are intended to benefit others, even at a slight cost to ourselves. What makes this moment so interesting is the tension it creates. You are not being asked for much, just a second or two of your time. Yet your brain, which is primed for efficiency and urgency, might resist. Social psychology has shown that when we feel rushed, our capacity for empathy tends to shrink. The famous Good Samaritan experiment revealed that people who are in a hurry are far less likely to help others, even when the need is clear. But to resist that instinct, to choose to pause, to make eye contact, to hold the elevator, is to restore a small piece of our social trust. It shows that speed does not have to override kindness, and it builds something called moral elevation, a term that psychologists use to describe the warm, inspired feeling we get when we either witness or perform an altruistic act. From a practical standpoint, you are still on the same ride. You are still heading to the same floor. But for that one other person, your pause might mean not being late, not feeling excluded, not being left behind. Moments like this make the invisible threads of our cooperation a little more visible. And they say, we're in this together, even if it is just for a lift between floors. I don't ask heavy questions when the credits are rolling. You are walking someone to their car, or you are wrapping up a phone call, and just as they are about to leave, you drop a deep, profound question. Something they were not expecting, something that clearly requires more time, but the moment is already closing. Now, they have to make a choice. Reopen the conversation or walk away feeling unresolved. The idea of not asking heavy questions when the credits are rolling is all about emotional timing. In psychology, people tend to mentally transition when they know that something is coming to an end. Their focus starts to shift to what is next, their next destination, their next task, or their next mental state. To drop a big or emotional topic during that shift can easily backfire. It is not that the question itself is wrong, it is that the moment cannot hold the weight of it. When someone says, "I should probably head out," their brain begins the process of winding down. That is when our energy levels dip, our attention narrows, and our emotional bandwidth shrinks. To introduce a serious topic in that state can feel abrupt and overwhelming. For example, if a friend is putting on their coat and you suddenly ask, "Do you ever think you'll be able to forgive your parents?" You have changed the emotional setting without any warning. They are no longer in a space where they can fully engage, even if the question is an important one. This happens at work as well. At the end of a meeting, or just before signing off a call, throwing in a critical point or a personal concern can make it much harder for others to respond thoughtfully. It catches them mid-transition. Good communication does not just depend on the content. It depends on the timing. Saving the big topics for the middle of the conversation, when both people are still present and focused, creates the necessary space for depth. Because heavy questions deserve our full attention, and our attention needs the right conditions to show up. I let someone stay mad without trying to fix it. When someone is upset, the urge to fix the situation can kick in with surprising speed. We want to calm them down, to talk it out, or to move things along. But not every emotion needs a repair. Sometimes, the most supportive thing you can do is to let someone stay mad without trying to make it disappear. The psychology behind this centers on the process of emotional processing. Anger, like any strong emotion, has a purpose. It can signal a boundary that has been crossed, a sense of injustice, or a deep-seated frustration. When we rush to smooth it over by offering solutions, minimizing it, or asking them to calm down, we can unintentionally invalidate what they are feeling. To let someone stay mad does not mean you have to agree with them. It means respecting their right to feel what they are feeling. Emotions are not like light switches. They take time to settle. Trying to force someone out of their anger too quickly usually leads to resistance or a complete shutdown, not to a resolution. Take a close relationship, like with a friend or a partner. If they are venting about a tough day or an argument they had, to jump in with logic like, "It's not that big of a deal," or "Just try to let it go," can make them feel dismissed. But to stay present, even if they are still angry, sends a different message. I can handle this. You don't have to censor yourself for my sake. Psychologically, this helps to build both emotional resilience and relational trust. It shows people that they do not need to manage your comfort when they are upset. They can move through their anger without fearing judgment, conflict, or abandonment. Giving someone permission to be mad without rushing them toward a resolution does not mean you are being passive. It means you are being patient. And that patience can be the very thing that allows the emotion to run its course, so that it does not get buried, redirected, or turned into something even harder to reach later. I don't ask, "What's wrong?" if I won't sit with the answer. When someone looks upset, it is easy to ask, "What's wrong?" It sounds like a caring thing to do, and sometimes it is. But if you are not prepared to stay present for the full answer, that question can do more harm than good. The idea behind not asking, "What's wrong?" if you are not willing to sit with the answer is about emotional availability. In psychology, this is linked to emotional responsiveness. Your ability to not just notice someone's distress, but to engage with it in a way that feels safe and supportive to the other person. To ask, "What's wrong?" is to open a door. If the other person walks through it, if they start to share something difficult and you then change the subject, look away or respond with a quick piece of advice, the result can feel deeply invalidating. It says, "I wanted the short version, not the real one." This happens frequently in fast-paced environments. At work, someone might ask out of habit, not out of a genuine readiness to listen. In friendships, people may have good intentions, but they are distracted or uncomfortable with vulnerability. The result is that people learn to shut down, answering with a reflexive, "I'm fine," even when they are not. A more mindful approach is to only ask if you are truly ready to listen. That does not mean you have to have the perfect response. It just means being willing to stay in the moment, even if the conversation gets messy or emotional. Sometimes that is just nodding. Sometimes it is saying, "Thank you for telling me. That sounds really tough." Psychologically, this helps to build emotional trust, a sense that sharing something will not lead to discomfort, awkwardness, or being brushed aside. And that trust is what encourages people to speak honestly in the first place. If you create a space for someone to talk, be ready to hold it. Because for many people, finally answering that question can take more effort than it seems. And how you respond will shape whether they will ever answer it again. Silence is room to breathe, not a gap to be filled. There is a pause in the conversation, and suddenly it feels uncomfortable. So you jump in, you say something, anything, just to break the silence. It is a common reflex, but it is one that often cuts a moment short before it has had the time to fully breathe. The idea that silence is room to breathe, not a gap to be filled, is rooted in how our brains process information and emotion. In conversations, especially emotionally charged ones, people often need a few seconds to reflect, to compose their thoughts, or to simply feel what they are feeling. That silence is not empty. It is doing important work. But because many of us are conditioned to view silence as awkward or as a sign that something has gone wrong, we rush to fill it. We change the subject. We offer quick advice, or we add unnecessary commentary. In doing so, we can unintentionally interrupt someone's internal processing or pressure them into responding before they are truly ready. Think about a moment when someone has shared something personal with you. If they paused for a few seconds, it did not necessarily mean that they were finished. It meant they were still unfolding what they wanted to say. Letting that pause happen can feel uncomfortable, but it allows the other person to stay with their thought instead of having to switch gears prematurely. Psychologically, silence is a part of communication. It gives people the space to feel safe, especially when they are being vulnerable. It signals that there is no rush, no demand to perform, and that you are there not just to hear, but to truly listen. In relationships, in therapy, or in our everyday conversations, the ability to sit with silence, even for a few seconds longer than feels natural, can completely change the tone of an interaction. It shows patience, presence, and emotional maturity. And more often than not, what follows that quiet moment is exactly what needed to be said. I let people exit conversations gently. When someone says, "Well, I should probably get going," it is not always just about the time. It is often a gentle signal that they are ready to wrap things up. But in social situations, that signal gets ignored more often than you might think. And that is where things can get awkward. The idea of letting people exit conversations gently is a social and psychological cue that is easy to miss, but is important to understand. In our everyday interactions, whether it is a phone call, a coffee chat, or a casual catch-up, there is often a moment when one person starts to send soft signals that they are ready to leave. They might check the time, shift their body language, or say something like, "Well, anyway." These are quiet ways of closing the loop. To ignore those cues by starting a new topic or by stretching the conversation further can make people feel trapped. It shifts the tone from being friendly to feeling forced. And the more this happens, the more emotionally tiring these interactions can become over time. Psychologically, this is related to our sense of autonomy. People want to feel like they can manage their own time and energy without having to constantly defend it. If exiting a conversation turns into a negotiation or a guilt trip, it can chip away at that sense of autonomy. To let someone leave gently does not mean you have to end things abruptly. It just means recognizing the cues, responding with warmth, and making the exit feel easy. A quick, sincere, "It was great talking to you," or "Let's be sure to catch up again soon," gives people the permission to go without any tension. This small shift in awareness can make our conversations more respectful and more sustainable, especially in friendships or work settings where our energy and time are often stretched thin. Because knowing when to let someone go is just as important as knowing how to hold a good conversation. If I see someone eating alone, I smile. You walk into a cafeteria, a cafe, or maybe a food court. The tables are filled with lively conversation, except for one. There, someone is eating alone, their eyes down, maybe scrolling through their phone, maybe just focused on their food. It is easy to look right past them. But what if you did not? A simple smile in that moment can shift an entire emotional atmosphere. Psychologically, this is rooted in our need for social connection cues, subtle signals that communicate a sense of inclusion and belonging. Human beings are wired for these. Even fleeting micro-interactions like brief eye contact or a quick nod can register in the brain as a form of validation. Eating alone can feel like a vulnerable act. It is one of those small settings where people may be more acutely aware of being seen or being ignored. Social psychology calls this the spotlight effect. We often believe that others are noticing us more than they really are. But for someone who is sitting solo, that spotlight can feel very real. A smile does not fix loneliness. It does not turn a stranger into a friend. But it does say, "You are seen." And that is not a trivial thing. Research on emotional well-being has shown that casual social gestures, which are known as weak ties, can significantly boost a person's mood. You do not need a deep conversation to make a difference. Just a moment of warmth, just a moment of recognition. It is also a form of social permission. When you smile at someone who is alone, you are not pitying them. You are telling them that their presence is just as valid as anyone else's, that they are not out of place. In a world that often rushes past the quiet corners, that small act of acknowledgement can land like a soft light on a dark surface. It asks for nothing in return. It is over in a second. But sometimes, a second is all that someone needs to feel a little less invisible. I described the impact before the intent. You say something, and you did not mean to hurt anyone, but someone ends up hurt anyway. Your first instinct might be to explain yourself. That's not what I meant. Or, I was just joking. But in moments like that, there is something more helpful you can do first. Describe the impact before you describe your intent. In psychology, this is tied to how people process conflict. When someone feels hurt or dismissed, their emotional reaction is based on the impact of what happened, how something made them feel. If you jump straight to explaining your intent, it can feel like you are completely skipping over their experience. That often leads to defensiveness and shuts down any chance of a real connection. Let's break this down. If you have accidentally offended someone with a comment saying, "I didn't mean it that way," may be true, but it does not address what actually happened. Instead, saying something like, "I can see that what I said really upset you," shows that you are focused on the effect that your words had. That creates the room for trust to be rebuilt. This approach does not mean you have to take the blame for something you did not do maliciously. It means acknowledging the emotional impact before you jump into a justification. It shows empathy before you offer an explanation. And that order is critical in conflict resolution research. This method helps to reduce resistance and makes people more receptive. It calms the emotional brain by validating the person's reality. After that, your intent becomes easier to discuss and is more likely to be understood. This concept works in personal relationships, in teams, and even in public apologies. When people feel like their emotions are being acknowledged, they are more likely to stay in the conversation, instead of shutting down or escalating. Describing the impact first is a small shift, but it is one that can turn a conflict from a standoff into a dialogue, and it is often the moment where real repair begins. I make space for the late bloomer. They did not peak in high school or in college or even in their 20s. While others were racing ahead, landing jobs, launching startups, and checking off all the boxes, they were still trying to figure out which lane to drive in. But here is the thing. Not everyone blooms on the same schedule. In psychology, this idea aligns with the concept of developmental timing, the understanding that people grow, change, and succeed at very different rates, whether it is in their emotional maturity, their social confidence, or their career direction. These milestones do not happen on a fixed timeline. Some people arrive early, others arrive later, and some take a scenic route that does not look like anyone else's. But socially, the late bloomer often gets overlooked. In classrooms, they may be labeled as underperforming. In workplaces, they may be passed over. And in their social circles, their progress can be quietly judged. This is partly due to what is known as the false consensus effect, the tendency to assume that our own pace is the normal pace and that everyone else should be moving in a similar way. To make space for the late bloomer means removing that pressure. It means creating environments where people are allowed to catch up without any sense of shame. Sometimes, that is a teacher who does not write someone off after one bad semester, or a friend who keeps inviting someone out, even if they are still a bit awkward in groups, or a boss who sees raw potential instead of just a resume. And here is what is often missed. Late bloomers can bring a depth to the table that early wins do not always build. They have watched from the sidelines. They have learned through their struggles, and they have grown outside of the spotlight. When they finally do arrive, they tend to bring perspective, not just performance. Development is not a race. It is a process. And the ones who bloom late still bloom fully, sometimes even stronger, and often with more to offer than anyone ever expected. Empathy expands when I ask, not when I assume. You might think you know what someone is going through, but until you ask, you are mostly just guessing. Empathy is often talked about as the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but psychology reminds us that without any real input from the other person, we are just imagining what it might feel like. And our imagination, no matter how well-meaning, is shaped by our own biases, our own history, and our own experiences, not theirs. That is why asking is so important. When you ask instead of assuming, What was that like for you? Or, do you want to talk about it? You are opening the door to understanding instead of just projecting. It may seem like a small shift, but it can change the entire emotional landscape of a conversation. You're not trying to be a mind reader. You're giving someone the space to speak in their own words. In psychological terms, this reflects what is called cognitive empathy, understanding what someone else thinks and feels by actively listening. Research has shown that asking questions, especially open-ended ones, leads to more accurate insights and a stronger emotional connection. It is the difference between thinking, "I bet they feel embarrassed," versus hearing them say, "I felt ignored, not embarrassed," which might totally reframe how you respond. This matters everywhere, at work, in our friendships, and even in our small daily moments. When we assume, we oversimplify people. When we ask, we get to see their complexity. And that complexity is where empathy really begins to grow. So instead of trying to fill in someone's story for them, offer them the mic. You will often be surprised, not just by what they say, but by how much more human they become the moment we let them speak for themselves. I credit the original sources because history has enough erasers. Someone once had to be the first one to say it, to test it, or to risk being wrong. Giving credit honors that moment. In psychology, attribution matters, not just for our ideas, but for our sense of dignity. When we credit our original sources, we are doing more than just citing facts. We are reinforcing the value of intellectual labor, especially from the voices that history has often overlooked. Psychologists call this source memory, our ability to recall where a piece of information came from. But culturally, our source memory can get fuzzy. Ideas travel fast, quotes get trimmed, and authorship can become blurred. And when the names vanish, so does the recognition, the trust, and the progress. Because if you never know who actually made the breakthrough, you might also miss where it came from and what other insights that voice could offer. This is not just about academic formality. It is about a sense of fairness. In every field, many of the contributions that were made by marginalized groups have been absorbed without any credit. From discoveries in neuroscience to practices in therapy, history is full of ideas that only gain traction after being repeated by more acceptable figures. To give credit builds integrity. It teaches a sense of respect, and it also shows others that their voices might matter too, that speaking up might actually lead somewhere. Whether it is in a classroom idea, a social media post, or a team project, acknowledgement creates trust. It tells people, your work is seen, and it counts. At the end of the day, erasure is not just about the past. It shapes who gets to be heard in the present. When you name the source, you are reinforcing a culture where ideas are not just borrowed. They are honored. And that small gesture is what keeps more minds in the conversation. Being right is less important than being kind. Arguments often spiral out of control, not because of what was said, but because of how badly each side needed to be right. It is a pattern that shows up everywhere. In our relationships, in online debates, and even in our small talk. But there is a simple truth at the heart of it. Being right is less important than being kind. This idea centers on the psychology of communication and emotional regulation. In the middle of a disagreement, the brain often moves into what is called a defensive state. The goal shifts from trying to understand to trying to win. Facts become weapons, the tone becomes sharp, and the connection disappears. Being right can feel good. It is a form of control, of certainty. But kindness does something else entirely. It keeps the relationship intact. It reduces defensiveness. And most importantly, it makes room for actual listening. Here is a simple example. If someone misstates a fact, like the date of an event or a minor statistic, correcting them sharply may prove your point, but it can also shut down the conversation. To respond gently or to let it go when it is not essential can keep the dialogue moving and the connection intact. In our close relationships, the impact is even more important. Correcting your partner mid-sentence, even if you are technically right, can make them feel small, and over time those small moments can add up. What is remembered is not your accuracy. It is how you made the other person feel. Psychologically, prioritizing kindness over correctness reflects a high degree of emotional intelligence. It means recognizing that not every mistake needs a spotlight and not every disagreement needs a verdict. It is not about lowering your standards. It is about knowing when the connection matters more than the correction. Because in the long run, being kind builds something much stronger than winning an argument. It builds trust, and that is what makes our conversations worth having. Your reaction becomes a part of someone else's memory. A memory is not just what happened, it is how someone felt about what happened. And how they felt often comes down to how someone else reacted in that moment. The idea that your reaction becomes a part of someone else's memory is a reminder that our responses can stick, not just in the short term, but in the lasting emotional narrative that people carry forward. Whether it is how you responded to someone's vulnerable story, a mistake they made, or a moment of celebration, your expression, your words, your tone, all of it gets stitched into how they will remember that day. This is not about walking on eggshells. It is about understanding that our memory is not recorded like a video. It is filtered through our emotions, and our emotions are shaped by our interactions. Neuroscience research has shown that when people recall their memories, they do not just access the facts, they relive the emotions. And the emotional tone of that memory often comes from how the moment was received by others. Think of a child who is excitedly showing off a messy drawing. A flat or distracted reaction might not seem harmful, but it becomes the emotional backdrop of that memory. On the other hand, a warm, interested response can turn even a small event into something that is cherished. It is the same in our adult relationships. When someone shares a personal story or confesses a fear, how you respond will shape how safe they feel being open with you in the future. Psychologists call this co-regulation. Our nervous systems can affect each other. Our reactions can either soothe or agitate, encourage or shut down. So, the pause you take before you roll your eyes, the effort you make to really listen, the choice to meet someone's vulnerability with care, those are not just kind gestures, they are memory-shaping tools. In short, we help to write the emotional version of someone else's story, even if we do not realize it at the time. I live in a way that relieves, not adds, to the emotional weight of others. Some people leave you feeling lighter after a conversation. Others leave you carrying something extra. To live in a way that relieves, not adds, to the emotional weight of others is about the kind of psychological footprint we leave behind in our everyday interactions. It is less about our dramatic actions and more about our small, repeated choices, how we speak, how we listen, and how we respond when we are under pressure. Psychologists often talk about emotional contagion, the idea that our moods and our stress levels can spread from one person to another. But this works both ways. A sense of calm, of kindness, and of emotional steadiness are just as contagious. When someone stays grounded in a tough moment, they make it easier for others to do the same. When someone validates a feeling rather than dismissing it, they give permission for honesty without any sense of shame. To live this way does not mean you have to avoid conflict or pretend that everything is fine. It means showing up with a sense of emotional intention. Do your words increase someone's sense of fear, or do they help to clarify it? Does your silence create a sense of uncertainty, or does it offer a space for reflection? Take our work environments, for example. A leader who handles bad news with transparency and a sense of calm can help the team to process it without panicking. In our friendships, simply listening without rushing in to fix things can relieve more pressure than advice ever could. Even our physical presence can matter. People tend to co-regulate each other's stress levels. A steady tone of voice or a grounded posture can ease the tension without you having to say much at all. This mindset is all about being aware of your emotional impact. You do not have to solve anyone's problems, but if how you live makes others feel steadier, not shakier, then you are already doing more than enough. I only reply all if every eye truly cares. It happens in offices every single day. A simple email goes out to a dozen people. One person hits reply all with a short thanks, and suddenly everyone's inbox pings. Then another, and another. And just like that, the noise has drowned out the signal. To reply all can seem harmless, even polite. But in psychology, it is a textbook example of communication overload. When a message is sent to many but is only relevant to a few, it creates a sense of friction. People will start to ignore threads, they will miss key details, or they will feel frustrated by the constant stream of irrelevant information. It is not just digital clutter. It is a small hit to our collective attention. In cognitive science, this touches upon the concept of attention economics, the idea that our attention is a limited resource. Every message we send pulls at someone's mental bandwidth. And in group settings, unnecessary replies can scale that cost. It is like speaking through a megaphone in a quiet room. It commands attention, even when none is needed. This is where emotional intelligence meets digital etiquette. The reply all button should be treated like walking into a meeting and making an announcement. If it is valuable to everyone, then share it. If it is only useful to one or two people, then send it to them directly. The rule is not about maintaining silence. It is about being considerate. Do your words serve the group, or do they just keep the thread alive? Thoughtful communication respects people's time, their inboxes, and their focus. In a world that runs on fast messaging and constant alerts, restraint is a quiet form of courtesy. Every time you choose not to hit reply all, you're giving everyone else the gift of one less distraction. And that, in today's world, is its own kind of respect. I don't punish someone for being fragile. When someone cries easily, gets overwhelmed, or struggles to bounce back right away, it can be tempting to label them as overreacting, or to treat them like a problem. But that reaction can do more harm than good. The idea of not punishing someone for being fragile is grounded in the need for emotional safety. Fragility, in this context, does not mean weakness. It means a heightened sensitivity to stress, emotional pain, or change. For some people, emotional intensity is a part of how they process the world. And when they are met with judgment or frustration instead of patience, it can add a second layer of distress, shame. Psychologically, this is tied to what is called emotional invalidation. That is when someone's feelings are dismissed, minimized, or punished. It can sound like, "You're being too sensitive," or "It's not that big of a deal." The message that is received is that their emotional responses are wrong or inconvenient, which can lead to anxiety, self-doubt, and an emotional shutdown. Let's say a coworker breaks down after getting some unexpected feedback. To respond with sarcasm or impatience may seem efficient, but it teaches them one thing: don't show your emotions here. Over time, this can create a work environment where people bottle things up, they avoid asking for help, or they completely disengage. The alternative is not to walk on eggshells. It is to respond with a sense of basic support. A calm voice, a few minutes of listening, or even just not piling on can be enough. It is about treating emotional vulnerability as something to be met, not as something to be managed. Fragility is not a permanent state. People can recover better when they are allowed to feel safe while they are struggling. And the way that others respond during those moments can play a big role in how quickly they regain their strength. Compassion does not mean you have to lower your expectations. It just means not adding pressure where support is needed most. I model vulnerability so that others can risk growth. In any group, whether it is a workplace, a classroom, or a circle of friends, people will often hold back. They will wait to see what is safe, what is accepted, and what is too risky to say. That is where the idea of modeling vulnerability so that others can risk their own growth becomes so powerful. In psychology, this is connected to the concept of social modeling, the process of learning through observation. People take their cues from those who are around them, especially from those who are in leadership roles. If the environment feels closed off or overly polished, most people will play it safe. But when someone openly shares a mistake, admits to their own uncertainty, or speaks about something personal, it sends a different signal. It's okay to be real here. Vulnerability is often misunderstood as a sign of weakness. In reality, it is about emotional openness, being honest about our fears, our failures, or our limitations, without collapsing under them. When someone models this, it creates a sense of psychological safety, a term that researchers use to describe environments where people feel safe enough to take interpersonal risks. For example, a manager who admits, "I missed something important in that report last week," makes it easier for the rest of the team to own their own learning curves. A teacher who says, "I used to struggle with this concept too," encourages their students to ask questions without any sense of shame. Even a friend who says, "I've been having a tough week," can make it safer for others to drop their guard. This kind of modeling can shift the dynamics of a group. It reduces the fear of judgment and increases collaboration, creativity, and resilience. People will stop trying to look perfect and will start to show up honestly, which is where real growth can happen. To lead with vulnerability does not mean you have to overshare. It just means being willing to go first. Because in human groups, permission often travels silently. And the person who opens up first gives everyone else a little more room to grow. I don't be the first one to laugh at my own joke. Sometimes what you say is genuinely funny, but when you rush to laugh at it before anyone else does, something shifts. It is no longer about the moment. It becomes about your own need for reassurance. The idea of not being the first one to laugh at your own joke is not really a rule about humor. It is about timing, trust, and the subtle psychology of connection. When someone tells a joke and immediately bursts into laughter, it can come across less like confidence and more like nervousness. It is a preemptive move, cutting off the chance of an awkward silence by filling it yourself. But in doing so, it often interrupts the natural rhythm of the social interaction. Laughter in groups is contagious because it is a shared experience. It spreads when people feel like they are in sync. That sync can be broken when one person is trying too hard to lead it. Think about a good comedian. They wait, they land the line, and then they let the audience come to it. That pause, that is where the magic builds. In our everyday conversations, it works in much the same way. There is also a deeper layer to this. Laughing at your own joke too early can signal a sense of insecurity. It can seem like you are asking for approval before others have even had a chance to respond. On the other hand, holding back, even for just a beat, can suggest a sense of confidence. It shows that you are comfortable enough to let the moment land on its own. Of course, sharing a chuckle is only human, but when your laughter jumps ahead of everyone else's, it is no longer a shared reaction. It is a cue. And sometimes, that cue can say more about how you are feeling than what you have actually said. In our conversations, timing can speak louder than words, and humor, when it is trusted to breathe, will often travel farther. I let others outgrow my memory of them. To let others outgrow your memory of them is about allowing people the space to evolve, even if it disrupts the way that we have come to understand them. Psychologically, it is common to lock people into fixed identities, especially those we have known for a long time. A shy sibling, a flaky friend, a difficult coworker. Once we have labeled someone, we tend to filter their new behavior through that old lens. This is called confirmation bias. We pay more attention to the evidence that supports our existing beliefs and we ignore what contradicts them. But people are not static. Our experiences, our setbacks, our therapy, even a new environment, these can all shift the way that someone moves through the world. When we resist updating our view of them, we are not just limiting them, we are distorting our own reality. You might notice this in small ways. Someone who used to avoid responsibility is now stepping up, but no one acknowledges it. A person who once struggled with their communication is clearly trying, but their effort gets dismissed. That disconnect can feel incredibly frustrating for the person who is growing, because even when they have done the work, they are still being held to a past that they have outgrown. To let someone outgrow your memory of them means to check your own assumptions, to watch what they are doing now, not just what they did then, and maybe even to allow the relationship to become something different too. Growth does not always come with an announcement. Sometimes the only clue is a pattern that quietly changes. And when we recognize it, without dragging the past back in, we make room for something healthier, for them and for us. I answer the call, even when it's awkward. There are some calls you just do not expect. An old friend reaching out after years have passed. A colleague who never calls suddenly ringing your phone. A family member messaging you at an odd hour. And sometimes, the easiest response is to just let it ring. But to answer, even when it feels awkward, can matter more than it seems. Psychologically, when people reach out, especially when it is unexpected or clumsy, they are often doing so from a vulnerable place. Maybe they do not know how to say what they really mean. Maybe they are trying to bridge a gap that they were not sure could be crossed. The message might not be perfect, but the act itself is significant. Avoidance can often feel safer. We tell ourselves that it is not the right time, that we will respond later, or that it is probably not important. But in psychology, avoidance rarely leads to any sense of clarity. It usually just feeds our anxiety. And the longer we leave those moments hanging, the harder they can become to revisit. Even a short reply, a brief answer, or a simple, "Hey, I saw this. What's up?" can send a message back, "I'm here. I saw you reach out." This is not about keeping every door open forever. It is about understanding that our responses can shape our emotional safety. To ignore a message may feel neutral, but it is rarely received that way. The brain has a tendency to interpret silence as a form of rejection or disconnection, even if it was not intended that way. To answer the call, literally or metaphorically, does not mean you have to dive into a long conversation. It means recognizing that human connection often starts messily, awkwardly, and unpredictably. And a simple acknowledgement can be the difference between a missed opportunity and a rebuilt bridge. In a world that often values efficiency over empathy, sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to just pick up, pause, and listen, even for just a moment. I hold space instead of holding court. You are in a conversation. Someone starts to open up, and before long, it is turned into a lecture about your experience, your opinion, your advice. It can happen easily, even with the best of intentions. But this is the difference between holding court and holding space. To hold space is a psychology-informed approach to supporting someone emotionally without trying to steer, to solve, or to center yourself. It means creating a safe, open environment where someone can speak freely and process what they are feeling without any interruption or judgment. In contrast, to hold court is when the listener takes control of the conversation, often by offering too much advice, personal stories, or a constant analysis. It may feel helpful in the moment, but it shifts the spotlight away from the person who actually needed to be heard. For example, someone says, "I've been feeling really disconnected lately." A person who is holding court might immediately respond with, "I know exactly what you mean. That happened to me last year when I started my new job, and here's what I did." That kind of response can sound supportive on the surface, but it quickly turns the moment into your story. To hold space would look different. It might mean saying, "That sounds really hard," and then just letting the silence stretch. You are not rushing in with your opinions. You are showing your presence, not your performance. Psychologically, this is all about emotional safety. To hold space invites people to explore their thoughts out loud, without the fear of being corrected, judged, or redirected. It is the kind of environment that can help people to feel in control of their own narrative, especially during their most vulnerable moments. In practice, it requires restraint, empathy, and a sense of trust in the other person's process. You are not the star of the moment, you are the backdrop that helps them to feel supported. And that shift can change everything. I replace "let me know" with a specific offer. When someone is going through a difficult time, it is natural to want to offer help. So we say, "Let me know if you need anything." It sounds thoughtful, but it rarely leads to any action. That is because in moments of stress, vague offers can feel more like a source of pressure than a source of support. The psychology behind this comes down to cognitive load, the mental effort that is required to process information, make plans, and come to decisions. When people are feeling overwhelmed, even simple tasks like trying to figure out what kind of help to ask for can feel exhausting. So, when you say, "Let me know," your intention is kind, but the burden of figuring out how to respond shifts back onto them. To replace that phrase with a specific offer significantly lowers the barrier to entry. It transforms support from something abstract into something they can actually use. For example, instead of saying, "Let me know if you need any help," you could say, "I can bring over some dinner on Tuesday night. Would that be helpful?" Or, "I'm free on Friday. Do you want me to take the kids for a few hours?" These kinds of offers work better because they require less decision-making on their part. The person does not have to scan through a list of options or feel awkward about making a request. All they need to do is accept or decline. Either way, it gives them back some of their energy. This idea also taps into what is known as proactive empathy, a type of support where you anticipate someone's needs instead of waiting for them to ask. It shows that you are not just available. You are paying attention. Offering something concrete is one of the simplest ways to make kindness more effective. It turns well-meaning words into something genuinely useful. And when someone is already doing their best just to stay afloat, removing even one decision from their plate can feel like a real and tangible relief. I ask if they want advice or just space. Someone begins to open up to you about a difficult day, and before they have even finished their sentence, you are already suggesting solutions. It is an instinctive reaction. You want to be helpful, but sometimes trying to fix things too quickly can do more harm than good. The psychology behind asking if someone wants advice or just space is about giving people a sense of control over how they process their own emotions. When someone shares a personal struggle, it can feel like an invitation to jump in with your ideas, tips, or encouragement. But not everyone is looking for that. In fact, many people simply want to be heard, not helped. By asking a simple question like, "Do you want some advice? Or do you just want to talk it out?" You are giving the other person the opportunity to guide the conversation in the direction they need. It is a small question, but it shifts the entire dynamic. Instead of assuming what would be most helpful, you are offering a choice, and that choice creates a sense of emotional safety. For example, a friend might say, "I am feeling completely overwhelmed at work." A typical response might be, "You should really take a break, or maybe talk to your manager." That is advice. But if they were not yet ready for solutions, it can feel dismissive. Now compare that with, "Do you want to just vent for a bit? Or are you looking to figure something out?" This lets them decide the direction of the conversation. Psychologically, this demonstrates empathy in action. You are not just responding to what was said, you are responding to what was needed. It reduces the likelihood of miscommunication, lowers the chance of defensiveness, and makes it easier for people to open up again in the future. It is a simple question, but it builds emotional intelligence on both sides. And over time, this one habit can completely change how supported people feel in your presence. I don't confuse silence with indifference. When someone does not respond right away, when they go quiet during a tough moment, it is easy to assume that they just do not care. But silence does not always mean indifference. Sometimes it means that they are feeling more than they can say. The idea of not confusing silence with indifference is rooted in the psychology of emotional regulation. In high stress or emotionally complex situations, people will often pause, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are working through what they are feeling. They may be feeling overwhelmed, they may be unsure of how to respond, or they may be afraid of saying the wrong thing. This is especially true in conversations that involve grief, conflict, or vulnerability. Silence might look like distance, but on the inside, a lot may be happening. Guilt, fear, discomfort, or simply the search for the right words. To react to that silence with frustration, to assume that someone is being cold or uninterested, can widen the gap rather than bridging it. Take a personal example. If you share something painful with a friend and they sit quietly for a while, it might feel like they are ignoring you. But in many cases, they are giving your words the weight that they deserve. They may be thinking carefully, or they may be holding back to avoid rushing you or saying something unhelpful. This concept also applies to different communication styles. Some people will process their thoughts internally. They do not speak in order to think. They think first, and then they speak. And silence is a part of that process. Psychologically, to recognize this helps to preserve our sense of empathy. Instead of rushing to fill the quiet or to interpret it as a sign of disinterest, it allows space for reflection and for better responses. The people who go silent might be taking you seriously, more seriously than someone who just rushes in with the first available reply. To understand the difference between silence and indifference can keep our meaningful connections from being misread or prematurely cut off. Because sometimes stillness can speak, it just takes a little longer to hear. I am always humble about my success. Success can make people listen to you, but humility is what makes them respect you. To be consistently humble about your success is not about pretending that you did not work hard or about minimizing what you have achieved. It is about how you carry that achievement in a room, in a conversation, or in someone else's story. Psychology points to a subtle but powerful truth. People are more receptive to those who can succeed without needing to constantly remind others of it. There is a concept that is called status signaling, which describes the ways that people will show their place in a social hierarchy through their clothes, their speech, or their behavior. But studies have shown that people tend to trust and to connect more deeply with those who do not constantly signal their status. In fact, those who will highlight their own flaws or their failures alongside their strengths will often come across as more authentic. Humility also leaves space for others. When someone shares the credit, admits what they do not know, or stays curious despite being accomplished, it can shift the dynamic from one of competition to one of collaboration. That alone can build a sense of psychological safety, the kind of environment where people feel free to speak up, to take risks, and to grow. Think about how success stories are told. When someone says, "I got lucky, but I also stayed prepared," it feels more grounded. It acknowledges their effort while still leaving room for context, for timing, for support, and even for failure. That honesty can make the success feel more real, not less. And socially, humility can act like gravity. People are drawn toward those who can lift others up without having to inflate themselves. Not because it is performative, but because it shows a high degree of emotional intelligence. At its core, to stay humble about your success does not mean you have to shrink yourself. It means being large enough to not need to prove it. Some kindnesses are invisible on purpose. Sometimes the kindest things that people do are the ones that you never see. They can go unnoticed, not because they are not meaningful, but because they are meant to be that way. The idea that some kindnesses are invisible on purpose is about intentional, quiet acts of support. Psychologically, this is connected to what is called pro-social behavior, actions that are intended to benefit others. But unlike grand gestures or public acts of generosity, these actions are designed to avoid any attention. The goal is not recognition, it is relief. In our everyday lives, this might look like refilling the coffee machine before it runs out, or covering for a coworker's small mistake without making a big deal about it. It might be a friend who checks in with someone they know will not ask for help, or someone who defends you in a room you are not in, without ever mentioning it to you afterward. These forms of kindness are powerful because they do not create any sense of obligation. They do not ask for a thank you, a favor in return, or even an acknowledgement. And that is what can make them feel so safe to receive. There is no pressure, no spotlight, just a quiet effort to make someone's day a little bit easier. From a psychological perspective, this kind of invisible kindness can reduce our social stress. People are often wary of being seen as a burden, or of being put in a position where they have to express their gratitude. When kindness happens without those expectations, it is more likely to be felt as a form of genuine care, not as a social transaction. In group settings, these invisible acts can build trust and cohesion over time. They can create a baseline of support that does not need to be announced to be effective. And while they may go unseen by most, they can often leave a lasting impression on the one person they were meant for. I assume there is a hard first draft behind every "I'm fine." Someone says, "I'm fine," but their voice is flat, their shoulders are tense, and they will not meet your eyes. You might nod, maybe you will smile, and then you will move on. But deep down, you know that something does not feel right. The idea of assuming there is a hard first draft behind every "I'm fine" is rooted in how people will cope with their difficult emotions. When someone says those two words, it is often not the full truth. It is the version that felt safe enough to say out loud. In psychology, this is related to a concept called emotional filtering. People do not always express what they are really feeling, especially when those feelings are complicated, raw, or still being sorted out. "I'm fine" is often just a placeholder, something that can buy them some time or can protect the speaker from going any deeper before they are ready. Think of it like writing. The first draft is not polished. It is messy, it is hesitant, and it is sometimes full of half-formed thoughts. The same goes for expressing our pain. When someone says, "I'm fine," they might really mean, "I don't know how to talk about this yet," or "I'm not sure how you'll respond." This does not mean you need to pry or to push. What it means is that you should listen more carefully. Pay attention to their tone, their body language, or any patterns in their behavior. If you can respond with a sense of patience and presence, not with any pressure, it can become easier for the real story to come out over time. People will often reveal themselves in layers, especially when they are hurting. And behind that short phrase might be something important that they have not yet figured out how to share. By assuming there is more beneath the surface, you can stay open to what matters most. Not the words themselves, but the effort it took for them to say anything at all. I offer specific help to reduce the friction for those who are struggling. When someone is feeling overwhelmed, to say, "Let me know if you need anything," can feel supportive, but it rarely works, not because you do not mean it, but because it puts the responsibility back on the person who is already struggling. The psychology behind offering specific help to reduce the friction for those who are struggling is based on how our stress can affect our decision-making. When people are feeling emotionally drained or they are under pressure, even simple choices can feel exhausting. This is called decision fatigue. The more steps it takes to ask for help, thinking about what to ask for, when, and how, the more likely it is that they will not ask at all. That is where specificity can matter. Instead of offering open-ended help, offer something that is clear and actionable. Say, I'm grabbing some groceries. Do you want me to drop off some dinner? Or, I can take the kids for a few hours this weekend if that would help. These kinds of offers can reduce the cognitive load. The person only has to say yes or no. They do not have to design the help themselves. Psychologically, this kind of support is more likely to be accepted because it can feel easier and less burdensome. It can remove the guilt that people will often feel when they're asking for help, and it can show that you have thought through what might actually make their day a little bit lighter. This principle also applies at work or at school. If a colleague is feeling overwhelmed, to say, "Let me know if you need help with anything," might not move the needle. But to say, "Do you want me to handle the client follow-up today?" can cut through the noise. To help someone is not just about your willingness. It is also about reducing the barriers that can keep them from accepting that help. And in those moments when everything feels heavy, even one less decision can be a great relief. I've learned that confidence is simply comfort with imperfection. You might assume that confidence stems from being flawless, from having the perfect speech, the perfect answers, and the perfect timing. But genuine confidence does not come from getting everything right. It comes from being at ease when you do not. The idea that confidence is comfort with imperfection is about psychological flexibility, the ability to remain grounded and self-assured even when things go slightly awry. In our daily lives, the people who appear to be the most confident are not necessarily the most skilled. They are simply less disturbed by their own mistakes. This manifests in all sorts of situations. A speaker who stumbles over a word, smiles, and continues on. A manager who can admit they do not have the answer without losing their authority. These moments may not be polished, but they are powerful because they demonstrate a sense of calm under pressure. In psychology, this is linked to self-efficacy, which is the belief in your own ability to handle challenges. Confident individuals do not expect to be perfect. They trust in their capacity to adapt, to recover, and to remain effective even with their flaws. And that mindset fundamentally changes how others perceive them. Someone who can laugh off a minor misstep or correct an error without becoming defensive often feels more trustworthy than someone who tries to conceal their mistakes. This also influences how people approach risk. When you are not afraid of being imperfect, you are more willing to try new things, to speak up, and to continue learning. Because failure no longer feels like a threat to your self-worth. It is simply a part of the process. Culturally, confidence is often confused with being loud or overly certain, but in practice, it is usually a quiet quality. It looks like being relaxed while you are learning, open when you are unsure, and calm when you are facing criticism. It is not about being invulnerable. It is about being real and still moving forward. And that kind of confidence tends to be more enduring because it does not depend on perfect conditions. It builds its strength through the cracks. I turn envy into curiosity. How did they do that? You see someone land your dream job, publish their book, or take a trip that you have always wanted to take, and without meaning to, envy can creep in. It is a normal human emotion, but psychology offers a better use for that feeling. Turn your envy into curiosity. How did they do that? Envy is a social emotion. It can show up when we compare ourselves to others, and we feel like we are falling short. Left unchecked, it can turn into resentment or self-doubt. But when it is reframed, envy can actually point to what we care about the most and can motivate us to grow. The key is to shift from a state of judgment to a state of informational thinking. Instead of saying, "They don't deserve that," or "I'll never get there," ask, "What steps did they take?" This can open up a learning mindset, which psychology calls active comparison. It can reduce your emotional reactivity and can focus your attention on your strategy, not on your status. For example, if a colleague gets a promotion, envy might trigger a sense of frustration, but curiosity will ask, did they take on any extra projects? Did they build stronger relationships with the leadership? These questions can turn your jealousy into an insight, something that you can actually act on. This can work in creative fields too. Instead of feeling threatened by someone else's success, curiosity can invite you to do an analysis. What's working about their approach? What could I try differently? That curiosity can make it easier to stay engaged and motivated instead of feeling discouraged or competitive. Psychologically, this shift can build a sense of self-directed learning and a growth mindset. It can remind you that success is often a process, not a mystery. And the people who seem to be far ahead of you, they usually started where you are, by asking better questions, one step at a time. Envy might get your attention, but curiosity is what can turn it into progress. Some things want a witness, not a repair. You hear someone vent about a breakup, a loss, or just a terrible week, and your first instinct is to try to fix it, to offer advice, to suggest solutions, to try to make it better. But sometimes, that instinct can miss the mark. The idea that some things want a witness, not a repair, is about understanding what emotional support really looks like. In many situations, people are not asking for answers. They are asking for your presence, for just someone to sit with them in what they are feeling without trying to change it. When someone shares something that is painful, it is often not because they think you have the solution. It is because they trust you enough to hold the weight of it with them. To try to fix it too quickly can feel like you are sweeping their emotions aside, even when you mean well. For example, a friend says, "I still think about my dad every day, and it just hits me out of nowhere." A fix-it response might be, "You should try journaling or maybe talking to someone." But a witnessing response would sound more like, "That sounds really hard. I'm here." You're not adding any advice. You're just offering your steady presence. Psychologically, this kind of support can activate something that is deeper than just problem solving. It can meet a need for validation by acknowledging that what someone is feeling is real and is worth being felt. That kind of emotional attunement can help people to process their own experience on their own terms without feeling rushed or minimized. Some experiences do not need a plan or a pep talk. They just need someone to stay present while the storm passes. And that presence, quiet, steady, and unforced, is often what can help people to heal more than any quick fix ever could. I remember birthdays, even quietly. In the middle of a busy week, a text might pop up, "Happy birthday. I hope you're doing okay." It is short, it is casual, and it might even be a day late, but it can stick with you because it means that someone remembered. The psychology behind remembering birthdays even quietly is about our need for personal significance. For many people, birthdays can carry a lot of emotional weight, whether it is tied to a celebration, a time for reflection, or just the simple hope of being acknowledged. It is not about the size of the gesture. It is about being seen. In psychological terms, this is connected to our need for belonging and for recognition. We all want to feel like we matter in someone else's mind, even if it is only for a moment. To remember a birthday can signal that you are paying attention, even to the small, non-essential details. That signal can become especially meaningful when it comes during a low period, or when someone is not broadcasting their birthday out loud. This does not require a grand gesture. A short message, a quick call, or even just mentioning it in passing can carry a surprising amount of emotional weight. Especially for people who can feel overlooked, these small signs of memory and care can have an outsized impact. It can also build something that psychologists call relational closeness. When someone feels that you remember the details about them, the things they did not have to remind you of, it can strengthen their trust and their emotional connection. It can show that the relationship is not just active when they are right in front of you. And while birthdays are just one day, to remember them, quietly or otherwise, can say something that is lasting. It is not just about marking a date. It is about signaling that someone's life is on your radar, even when they are not asking for your attention. That small mental bookmark can matter more than we think. Progress beats perfection every single time. You start a new habit, working out, writing, eating healthier, and after just one off day, you can feel like you have blown it. So you might pause, or you might quit, or you might just wait for the right time to start all over again. That is the trap of perfection. And psychology has shown that there is a much better path. Progress beats perfection every single time. This idea is grounded in the concept of behavioral momentum, the principle that small, consistent actions can build lasting habits more effectively than occasional, flawless ones. When people will aim for perfection, they can tend to delay their starting. They can avoid taking any risks, and they can get discouraged by the normal setbacks of life. But progress is different. It can allow space for imperfection while still moving you forward. In psychology, this is tied to our sense of self-efficacy, your belief in your own ability to handle challenges and to make changes. Every time you take a step, even a small one, you can reinforce the idea that you are capable, and that can build your motivation over time. Perfection, on the other hand, can often create rigid expectations that can collapse under the first sign of failure. Take a simple example: someone who wants to read more. A perfection mindset might say, I need to finish a book every single week. If you miss that target just once, it can feel like a failure. A progress mindset would say, reading for just 10 minutes today is better than none at all. That habit can stick because it is flexible, and that flexibility can build real change. This can apply to our learning, our health, our relationships, and even our creativity. Growth is not about flawless execution. It is about showing up again, even when it is messy. Psychologically, to celebrate your progress can help to reduce your anxiety, to boost your confidence, and to increase your resilience. It can turn your goals into systems, not into tests. And over time, the people who succeed the most are not the ones who did it perfectly. They are the ones who just kept showing up, one imperfect step at a time.